Ragnarok, released November 8th of 2022, just 1 week before the Game Awards cutoff deadline. Hey, if you've ever had to do a homework assignment and you waited until the very last day to turn it in, then you've got something in common with Sony Santa Monica, because they just barely squeezed this game into the 2022 awards ceremonies. And congratulations to them. They've already racked up quite a few awards, including Best Actor from Mr. Christopher Judge, right? The person who, of course, plays Kratos in God of War. And in his acceptance speech, he said, I wasn't feeling too comfortable about the new director. This was the directorial debut, I believe, of Eric Williams. But eventually he did turn around, and I think the incredible work that Eric has done is evident, and the entire team. This is a hell of a directorial debut. The game was a huge success, right? It's at around a 95 on Metacritic out of 100, which is roughly what the previous game scored as well. The user scores are typically a little bit more reflective of reality, and so those scores are about an 8 out of 10 for this game, and a 9 out of 10 for the previous game. So it's not quite up to par with the predecessor. It definitely does rest on its laurels in a few ways, but there's a lot to learn about this game. It definitely brings a lot to the table, and hey, it's a hell of a thing to see one of the leaders in our industry knock out a very successful game. It's great for the industry, and it's a lot of fun, right? It's a great game that they've created here. So we're going to talk about what's awesome about the game, and in some ways that it could be improved from a game developer's perspective. If this is your first time visiting the channel, my name's Matthew Ventures. Welcome to the Matthew Ventures YouTube channel. It's a pleasure to have you here. I talk about mostly things from a game developer's perspective. This is a channel mostly for game devs like me who are trying to grow and improve themselves. So we're going to talk about some ways in which the design could be improved, mostly from a gameplay perspective, because that's what I do. But we'll talk a little bit about just general design in general, and whatever else comes up. I'll try to cover the whole swath of game development if I can. With that being said, I don't do game reviews a lot on this channel. I don't do a lot of reviews in general on this channel. If you want to check out my reviews and what I thought about different media, you can head on over to mrventures.net/recommendations. There you can find my favorite media of all time, whether that's my favorite books, favorite movies, favorite games, you name it. It's also got my recommendations to you, and it's a place where you can see all of my reviews that I've ever written, and you can also leave recommendations for me. If there's a game or a movie that you want me to play and review, I'd be happy to do so. So all of that is over at mrventures.net/recommendations. And without further ado, I wanted to, let's jump into the review. Actually, I realized something. I have to do a bunch of disclosures here. And this is a good time to tell you that the bottom of the screen has time codes, right? So you can go down there with your mouse and you can click different parts of the video and you can skip between parts, because unlike this video game, you can skip the boring parts of this video. So I encourage you to do so. If there's a part you're like, all right, oh, enough of this, skip on forward, jump on at you. Okay, the next section of this video, the reason why I wanted to tell you that is because the next section is not for you. The next section is for me to talk about some of the legal constraints that I have and to do a bunch of disclosures that I am mandated to do from my company, Mr. Bill Gates' Microsoft. Let's jump over to the Real Talk camera. Hey, how's it going, folks? This is the Real Talk camera. If I come over here, that's because I'm going to give you some real talk. And it's the real talk that I have a bunch of disclosures to make. The first one is I'd like to disclose to you that I did work on this game, God of War Ragnarok. For 2 months, I worked as an intern on the Sony Santa Monica team, and man, was it a pleasure. It's an amazing team. Not only are they great game developers, they're great people too, and I really enjoyed my time there. If you'd like to see a recap of what that was like, then you can check out my YouTube video, Intern of War, which goes into detail on what that experience was like. And for people who might say, hey, you're only going to be negative to the game because you worked on it. Well, you know what? We are our own harshest critics. That's just how you have to be in this world if you want to improve. On the other hand, some people might say, hey, you know what? You're only going to say positive stuff about this game because you worked on it. To which I would say, you know what? In this world, you've got to be your own best advocate, because that's just the world we live in. So hopefully that covers all my bases. There's 2 more disclosures I have to make. I work for a company called Microsoft, and that company has told me that I cannot profit at all from any media that I make besides the media they pay me for. And so as a result of that, all proceeds of this video and any other YouTube videos on my channel will be going to charity. I'm particularly donating to the Against the Malaria Foundation, which is supported by GiveWell, and it's a great foundation to help fight the scourge of modern malaria. One more thing is that I am legally obligated to not say anything negative about another game created in my industry. Now, that is a little bit tricky. It's a little bit tricky to do a game critique or a game review when you can't say anything negative. So I'd like to just say that if I say anything that sounds like it could be negative, that's not the case at all. In fact, I love this game. I love every part of this game. And the parts that sound negative are not parts I didn't like. They're just my least favorite parts. Okay, I want to underscore that. It's a really good game. I don't make reviews on this channel unless I like the games. And with that being said, really every game could be improved in some way, right? So that doesn't mean it's bad. It just means that there's something here that we could learn from. And in particular, I'm interested in this game because I think there's a lot in common with some of the games that, studios like id Software are known for, right? I think there is a lot of parallels between, for example, God of War Ragnarok and Doom Eternal. And there's stuff that we can learn from, whether or not we're an indie dev or we're a dev in the AAA environment. So hopefully that wraps up all my disclosures. Let's jump over to the main camera. Oh, okay, and we're back. So, I reviewed this game after playing it on PlayStation 5 and PlayStation 4. It's a great game, and with that being said, though, there are definitely a lot of bugs. This is a buggy game. There's a lot of issues, and at points they seriously undermine the grandeur of the work. But I think we're going to start with the strengths, and we're going to start with the story. So this game has amazing acting, okay? Absolutely incredible. It's clear where they wanted to put their big budget, where they wanted to put the big money and lots of focus. And when you can hear them, the actors in this game are incredible. Every single performance that was brought to the screen, top-notch, really, really well done. It's clear that they are putting their effort there. In fact, Sony Santa Monica is kind of known for its soundstage, right? When I was working there, I recall that a lot of the other studios would come to our studio when they wanted to record their stuff because of just how much money, essentially, this team has put into really creating high fidelity video capture, particularly motion capture, right? I remember I was getting a taco one time at one of those food trucks, and my friend had bumped me on the shoulder and he said, hey, look over there. That's Neil Druckmann, the creative director of The Last of Us, right? And the writer of The Last of Us, right? So I saw him and I was like, oh man, that's incredible. So many people from, not really around the world, right? Those guys are our neighbors, but so many other studios. And of course, I recall Glenn Schofield was just mentioning that for his latest game, I forget what it was, whatever the remaster or reboot of a Dark, what is it called? Dead Cells? Gosh darn it. I forget the name of the game. But whatever the one that Schofield is known for. I can't remember the damn name. Whatever that game is, he was there as well in that recording studio. So there's a lot of really amazing games that have come out of that recording studio, and it's a testament to the amount of effort that they want to put into that. It all shows through. I think the actor who played Thor did a particularly tremendous job, but really everybody in the cast was phenomenal. Christopher Judge, of course, won Best Actor, and he certainly deserved it. And that's because, well, you know what? They put a lot of screen time is dedicated to the actors. So let's talk a little bit about the length of this game. This game is, according to howlongtobeat.com, which is usually my point of reference for this sort of thing, this game is about 25 hours compared to the previous game, which was about 20 hours. I went through YouTube as well, and I scrolled through a bunch of playthroughs, and I found that the playthroughs on YouTube ranged. There were about 20 hours for this one and about 15 hours for the previous one. So no matter where you slice it, it seems to be that this game is roughly 25% longer than the previous game, or about 5 hours longer. And I have to say, you do feel it. This game is a little bit slow at times. It definitely does have a little bit of some pacing issues, which we'll get into a moment. But one thing I want to commend is just how they were able to grapple extending their cast. So the original game had a much smaller cast, maybe like 5 people, here and there, right? This game easily doubles the size of that cast. And yet, despite that, the writers were able to sort of make everybody have a role in the story, and it was very compelling the way that they pulled it all together. So I think they did a really good job of sort of incorporating this huge cast, because it definitely became a bit of an ensemble piece, and also getting a lot of them integrated within the gameplay. So there are various elements or points within the story where you're actually fighting alongside some of the different characters who you've come to know and love from the cutscenes. Unfortunately, though, it does feel like they're sort of two different games. The cutscenes definitely have a bit of a separation from the actual gameplay, and we'll get into that. But overall, I think they did a really good job with all the visuals and effects and the acting. Very well done. The story itself does not do a great job of contextualizing the gameplay into the narrative. So there are some exceptions where they do a great job, like 5 out of 5 experience situation. For example, there is a boss that you fight that is a giant bear, and you later learn that this bear is a very, very important character within the greater narrative. And the way that it weaves in that narrative through the gameplay is phenomenal. It goes immediately from the boss battle to the big reveal, and then it just sort of coalesces in a way that you feel like the gameplay was almost as awesome as the cutscene. There are other parts in this game where that is not the case. For example, in the boss battle in the Elfheim, you fight basically a no-name elf who just appears randomly out of nowhere, and you kind of feel like, oh, I'm fighting this boss at the end of the level, because at the end of the level there should be a boss. And the narrative doesn't really work very hard to try and justify why this guy is there, or even, who his name is. It doesn't always do as good a job as it does with the bear. And so at those times, you really kind of get taken out of the experience, and you feel like you're just playing a video game. And, this is just the boss battle. It is what it is, right? It's not actually a character within the story. It's just some random objective in front of you that you've got to surpass. Similarly, there's like a random boss battle you have to fight in the middle of the woods called the Huntress, which isn't really well contextualized in the story at all. So there's a bunch of that going on where there's just sort of these random boss battles kind of flicked around here and there. Whereas I think other games do a better job of contextualizing a narrative around the bosses. God of War's team certainly knows how to do that. They did so with several of the bosses. The fight with Thor, with Odin. There's so many amazing fights in this game. Heimdall. There's so many amazing fights in this game that are well contextualized in the story. And then there are others that fall far short of the bar they set for themselves, which was a high bar. So, I mean, it's really like, oh, sometimes this feels like a 3-star experience versus 5 stars, let's say. But that's not to say it ever falls below, let's say, a medium average experience. It's always either at or above expectations with respect to the story. It does feel much longer, and part of that is because the characters are mostly aimless throughout the story. And that kinda is not so good, okay? Kratos is often just sort of going along with whatever his son says, and he feels like he has a very passive role in the narrative of this story. It doesn't feel great. In fact, there's often this sort of line that they call back to at various points within the story where Loki says, hey, I'm just doing giant stuff, right? He's a giant, right? This is no reference to size, let's say. But he's just like, hey, man, I'm just doing giant stuff. I'm just going over here doing giant stuff. What does that mean? It's not really explained, and it's sort of like a joke, like, hey, I'm just going to say it, and we're going to throw it away. But it's not really a joke because it's at the expense of the story itself, and you kind of feel like they're making fun of their own bad writing. It's not really a good joke to be making, folks. Maybe we should contextualize why he's doing any of these things, and they have reason to. Man, there's so many missed opportunities here with respect to making this story make sense, giving these characters some agency. There's so many opportunities for that. For example, it would have made perfect sense for us to say, hey, Atreus, following the bear situation, is having a lot of difficulty controlling his powers, and so it might make sense for him to seek out fellow giants so that he can understand how his powers are affecting him and how he can better control them. But that isn't really incorporated into the narrative at all. And when he finally does meet up with Tyr, who he's been searching for maybe the whole first arc of the story, he pretty much just gives him a high five, and then we never really interact with him again. It's not very well done. You definitely kind of feel like this whole just doing giant stuff is a throwaway, and it doesn't show the story in a positive light, unfortunately. There's a serious lack of urgency in this plot. A lot of times characters are just kind of moseying around, going wherever the wind takes them, and it doesn't feel good for a story. Now, there's nothing wrong with having exploration. You just need to have some sort of objective in mind. For example, the famous, okay, so here's a classic scene out of maybe a Tomb Raider kind of game. The cavern is filling with water. You've got to find an exit from this cavern, and you've got to find one fast, because if you don't, the cavern's going to fill with water and you're going to drown. This is like a classic Tomb Raider dilemma. And what do? You're exploring. You're trying to find an exit to this cavern, but you feel a little bit of a sense of urgency. Similarly, maybe in like an Indiana Jones kind of narrative, you might need to go find the MacGuffin, right? The crystal skull, whatever it is, right? But you've got to do it before the enemies find it, right? Usually Nazis. So you've got to do that, and there's some time pressure, right? So of course you're exploring, you're trying to see, okay, what's this temple? What's the history? But you know at the back of your mind that there is a ticking time clock. And while it's alluded to in this game that, yes, Ragnarok is coming, it's not really shown, right? It's definitely one of those situations where you want to show, don't tell. In this case, you're really only told that Ragnarok is coming, and there isn't really a good job, I think, of some sort of impending dread, like, oh, the clock is ticking. And part of the reason is they kind of shot themselves in the foot, because a lot of the gameplay wants you to go explore. In fact, there's different sections of the game where you come up to an intersection and he says, hey, if you want to progress the main quest, then go do this thing. But actually, it's not such a big deal that Ragnarok is coming and the whole world's going to explode, because if you want to go spend some time exploring, go this other direction and have some fun, right? So they're kind of undermining their own, MO there by telling players to kind of go fuck off and do a side quest if they want, while trying to maintain this idea that, like, there's an impending danger and you've got to save the world. So, it's just, this is a good example of sort of what you might call ludonarrative dissonance, where the story's trying to say something, but the gameplay is trying to say something else, and so when the two come together, it feels a little disjointed. It feels like the story isn't really supporting the gameplay, and these are some narrative issues that the first game didn't really have as much, and they're starting to rear their head in this one. Okay, with all that being said, let's talk about the gameplay and how it... Actually, let me say this. So, while some cutscenes are a welcome reprieve, for example, there's a really great cutscene where they all sit down around the dinner table and they're hanging out and they're laughing, and it's a nice moment. You feel like you get to relax a little bit with these characters. For the most part, other sections of the game are just way too slow, right? And I'm talking very, very monotonous. There's this one mission that's become a little bit of a punching bag critically. A lot of negative things have been said about this mission. I don't think it's really a bad mission per se, but it's definitely a mission that needs to be cut down seriously. It's way too long. Is the Agrabota mission. So Agrabota is the love interest in this game. This is the love interest of Loki, fated to be, I think, his wife or something like that. They're going to fall in love somehow. And boy, oh boy, the Agrabota mission is maybe an hour and a half. In the gameplay I saw an 18-hour gameplay, but it was cut in such a way that if ever he died, he would cut out the parts he died. You'll see some sections of that. If I'm showing gameplay, this is from this guy. His name's Game Clips on YouTube. 4 million subscribers or something like that. He played this game in 18 hours, and about an hour and a half, or about a tenth of the entire game, is this Agrabota mission. And man, the plot is definitely slow in this game, but in this particular mission, it just reaches a standstill, and it really feels not very good. That's a tough one. And one of the reasons why this mission is particularly tough is, again, that sort of lack of agency. CD Projekt Red made a lot of noise in the industry when they decided, you know what, our quests, we're not going to have any filler quests. That's what they said. They said, we've seen World of Warcraft, for example, and they'll give you a quest where you have to go kill 5 goblins, and it feels really lame. It feels very gamey. It doesn't feel like a good quest design, and it feels repetitive, right? And so what they decided was, we're not going to have any of those fetch quests. However, in this game, in the Agrabota mission, you do have a quest that is go kill 5 goblins, except it's go kill like 2 swamp lizard nests. But it's exactly that kind of repetitive, monotonous, boring quest design that gamers have come to expect a little bit more of, especially from a first-party studio. And this level was not very well designed. So I can definitely understand why people are frustrated by this. I think a lot of the cutscenes in this section of the game are great, and it's a really awesome boss battle where you fight Agrabah's grandma. So, as silly as that might sound, there's a lot of really good relationships there and good work. However, the gameplay that's supposed to glue it all together really does not live up to expectations. It really does fail, because the game just, you think, why am I here fighting these lizards? And they say more or less for no reason. Let me show you a clip here. Let's jump into this clip.
Supplies for paint down there.
Yeah? We should run them out. Your paint supplies are important, if that's what you want to do.
Sure. Why not? Lina.
Okay, so that's basically all the narrative exposition you get for this scene. So basically she's saying, hey, you know what, I come down here sometimes to draw paintings, and so because of that, we're going to spend the next hour and a half fighting lizards. If that sounds a little silly, it's because it is. It really wasn't well thought out, and I think they could have done so much just to better contextualize this within the narrative. Maybe it's that Loki is having some sort of issue, and so because of that, they need to switch back over here. Maybe because he's having some sort of issue, they need to go and find some MacGuffin that can help heal him, or otherwise help him out for some reason, or maybe Agrabah needs some help with something, because freaking Ragnarok's right around the corner, right? So maybe Ragnarok is negatively affecting her biome, and she needs to do something to save the world, to save the area, because she loves animals and stuff like that, right? There's so many better ways that they could have done this other than, hey, I need to go kill some lizards because this is where I sometimes find my paint supplies. Come on, guys, that's just a little silly. So let's not harp on it any longer than we need to. Let's keep going. So I wanted to say something. I didn't get a chance to say it earlier, but it's that everybody, when they play a game, they are going to take something different away from it. And something that I thought was just really interesting was a lot of the UI designers who I have the privilege of working with have said that this game did an amazing job of doing background for the closed captioning. Now, that is not actually something I would have thought I'd be highlighting in this review, but I just want to show it because it's so interesting, right? That everybody kind of gets a different takeaway from these games, right? Obviously, I'm focusing mostly on gameplay stuff, but this is interesting from a UI perspective. So what they've done in the background here, this is really cool, is instead of doing a solid color background, they've instead partially blurred the image that is behind the text. So back here where you would normally see Atreus' armor, instead you have sort of like a blurred view, and then on top of that, they've layered the white text with a black border that says, in this case, Atreus. And this works really, really well. So here's an example where basically they're on top of rocks, so you'd expect basically white on gray, that's going to look good. But even down here, when he's looking straight towards what is this, like some snow, it's white on white, basically, but it looks really good. And so, of course, the black border is going to do that with the black outline, but the blur actually does a really good job of sort of like reducing noise, and it helps those letters really pop. So it's always interesting what different people what their takeaway is, and I wanted to share that as like a really cool insight that a bunch of my friends who are UI developers had seen. Okay, cool. So we talked a little bit about the story. I guess it's worth asking, is this game too long? Okay, it's 25% longer than the previous game. It's got a lot of content. It's got maybe 2 or 3 times the cast. Is this game too long? Well, from a production standpoint, the answer is obvious, right? The answer is yes. Without a doubt, this game was way too long. And that's because they didn't finish on time, right? They had a let's go into real talk for a moment, okay? Because I realize this is a little bit of a sensitive subject. The game is too long because they weren't able to finish on time. They had in mind, I think it was like 4 years or something like that, and they wound up extending the game's release by an entire year, right? The first game released in April, right? Which is a little atypical for a video game release. Normally, video games get released in November because that's right around Christmas and Kwanzaa season when everybody's going to go buy gifts for all the good little boys and girls. But if they were anticipating a April release date again, then that would have meant this game was delayed 1.5 years, right? So this is a pretty serious delay. And if that's not the case, if they did want to do a November release, then they delayed it by an entire year, right? And as I said before, right, this game was literally released maybe the last weekend they could, if you're going to hit the Christmas season. So it's a testament, I think, to how much the publisher really trusts this developer, because not a lot of developers could say, hey, actually, I'm going to delay this game for a whole freaking year. It's a testament to how much faith they had in this team and the product, and I think it paid off for them. But, well, I think even when you consider, the product that they were able to deliver, unfortunately, the product definitely has some issues. And even with the delay, right, we're talking about 1.5 years or maybe just a year later, there definitely are some bugs that undermine the story. And we're going to talk about some of those today. So there's no easy way to slice it. This game has a lot of bugs. Definitely below the quality level that I think we would expect from a first-party Sony game. And the bugs are not trivial little animation pops, though I definitely saw some of those. These bugs are serious games that in several cases crashed me completely out of the game. I think it was never a point where it was like a hard crash. It was always a point where I could not continue the game because something was broken. And so as a result of that, I had to completely restart the game. So let me see if I could find you some examples of what I'm talking about here. Okay, so I have a little bit of a quick demo here. Obviously, not really here to focus on bugs, but they're a very important part of any technical project. Here's one video I took. It looks like this video is sideways, but you don't really need to see the video. It's not really relevant.
It's just randomly
but basically
stopped while I was playing, and it started this cutscene.
Let me just mute that.
With all of these guys.
So basically what's happening is it started this cutscene, and none of the dialogue has captions, and actually I can't hear any of the dialogue as well. And that was for the entire cutscene. And then later on, the cutscene ends. Let's see if we could see that. And then immediately the audio just goes back on. And this happened constantly throughout the game. There was different sections, different pockets that were just totally broken. Let's see this.
Okay. Now I can hear the sound is starting to come back. Yep. Okay, so we went into the cutscene. And now...
And then the captions come back, the audio comes back just randomly. So it seems like something was totally broken within that cutscene. And keep in mind, this is after the day one patches or whatever patches were released, because I'm not playing this game as soon as it was released. Here's another example of just a really frustrating bug.
Can't
basically
leave. I'm facing an invisible wall here.
I got stuck behind an invisible wall, and I couldn't progress past this part of the game. I had to completely reset the checkpoint, which required me, again, watching like a 5-minute cutscene.
That's preventing me from going forward or backward. I'm just kind of stuck in this realm between the realms.
Okay, so this is another example of basically where it got crashed. And then I don't know if I have footage of it, but there was some other issues as well. Like I had a very similar thing happen where basically in the fight with Odin, this was all on PS5, but there was another issue where I was on PS4, and during the fight with Odin, the audio completely cut. I couldn't hear anything at all in the game, and restarting the checkpoint actually didn't work in that case. I had to close the application and then relaunch it within the PS5 main menu. So a lot of bugs, definitely more than we would expect, right, from the first-party studio like this, but do they get in the way of the experience? That's sort of the next question I would ask. In this case, the answer is definitely yes. Reloading the freaking game is unacceptable, right? This game reached gold certification, but there's certainly a lot of problems. So, with all that being said, there's definitely there's definitely frequent bugs, but I wouldn't say that they are happening. I would say there's like a really big bug about every 2 hours or so, right? So I'd say over the course of 20 hours, maybe 10 times, I kind of got pissed off at like various issues. And then constantly the audio is clipping in and out throughout the entire game. So I would say the background music, the voice acting, all that stuff is incredible. It's just seriously undermined by a lot of technical faults that that um that just, it's just frustrating, right? Let's go to real talk real quick, okay? Let me tell you something, okay? I played this game with a friend of mine. She had visited, and it's just embarrassing, right? Having this person next to me while we're playing the game, and you can't hear any of the audio for like an entire cutscene, right? So it's frustrating. It's not something we ever want to see in this industry, but it is the reality of making technical products. They're gonna break, right? One of the hardest things is when you have to design for different platforms, right? You never know. For example, when you're making an Android game, you never know what kind of platform it's gonna run on. With PlayStation, you really don't have that excuse, right? Because you're developing for literally 2 consoles. And so, though this team has done an amazing technical achievements to make it run on PS4, this game launched with a lot of bugs. It's worth pointing out in this review, and I don't know if there's anything more that I should say about it. It's definitely below the quality you'd expect from a 5-star game, but it's not so bad that I think there's going to be like some legal action or something crazy like we saw with Cyberpunk or Fallout 76 or something like that, right? So worth noting, you have to include it in a review, but I think for most people, it's not going to spoil the experience, though it will undermine the performances and stuff like that, right? Unfortunately, the cutscenes, you can't go back, right? You can't go back and replay the cutscene. And you can't skip the cutscenes either, right? So it's a bit of a tricky situation, and unfortunately, at some point, you just got to throw in the towel, and you got to say what's done is done. This game's already been released, delayed a year and a half. It's freaking November 8th, right? We got to get it out the door, and I think the team made the right call in pushing it out, even though it's still a little broken. Okay, so I think that wraps up everything I wanted to say about bugs. It's not fun to talk about that kind of stuff. One of the other things I wanted to mention is that, so this game has unskippable cutscenes, and I think I wanted to show you guys this video because I think it's actually really illustrative of why a studio might do that. Because I understand a lot of gamers might not appreciate the requirements that the technical team is under there. This is from a GDC talk by the great Elon Ruskin, technical director, I believe, for Insomniac. And this is such a cool video because it really shows what's going on behind the scenes. In the main view here, we see what the player is experiencing, and that is soon going to be on the bottom right-hand side of the screen. We're going to see what the player sees. However, in the main part of the screen, we're going to see everything that's happening behind the scenes during a cutscene. Let's check it out.
From Broadway, going into an interior tower. Bottom right's what you see in the game, pulling the debug camera
Let's get my face out of the way.
out. What are we doing? Getting rid of that city as fast as we can.
Okay, so let's just pause it here, right? So you could already see the city is completely obliterated. All of this is getting deleted while the camera is focusing on the part that still remains, right? We've seen some of the stuff in live action where you've got all this crazy stuff happening behind the cameraman who's trying to get the one-shot take as everything else is being moved in and out behind it. This is a really cool parallel in a digital realm.
Here comes the Fisk interior, twice the size, 100 meters in the sky.
And lock down the airspace.
You okay?
If he makes it out of that building, we're gonna lose him.
Okay, and this is where the scene was just starting, where we saw the cops doing the shootout, where basically they exist, but everything around them in the entire world has been obliterated at this
We're
point.
cropping the hides, the dirty work.
Do your thing.
Coming into the exterior building. Lighting change.
Hey, where are you going? Ken! I'll clear a path. Follow me.
And we're inside. Yeah, seamless, right? Really cool. Took us a month to do. If we did everything like this, we would still be making the game. So we bit the bullet and said load screens.
So, let's jump back to the other camera here. So what did he say? He said they bit the bullet and did the load screens. That was Insomniac. Well, hey, folks, guess what? Sony Santa Monica did not bite the bullet, okay? Sony Santa Monica said there's going to be no load screens in our game. We're going to have the no-cut camera, And, while this team said, hey, it took a month to do this one cutscene, Sony Santa Monica doubled down, right? And that's an incredible testament to the engineering work that went into this game. A lot of people don't realize how much work it is to prevent a load screen and to try and get everything to seamlessly, additively load into the scene like that. So this is an amazing technical achievement whenever they do something like this. And they did it again. So kudos to the team. This is really, really cool from a technical perspective. And I do think it adds a lot to the immersion of never having that, never having a cut there. With all that being said, I still think this is an example where the narrative got in the way of the ludology and the player experience. I definitely think, especially on a subsequent viewing, it makes sense for you to be able to skip cutscenes. I think that would have been a sensible decision. And so while it's cool that they built this tech, I think there's a few cases in this game where maybe they're so committed to this really awesome thing they did and they want to show you that sometimes they do stuff that's just a little silly and trying to show it to you, right? Like maybe preventing you from skipping through cutscenes, right? Another example might be, for example, that the accessibility settings. This game put a ton of effort into accessibility settings to the point that they have it's got its own section on the main menu, right? Obviously, accessibility settings should be within the settings menu, but they were like, you know what, fuck it. It's going to be its own thing on the main menu, right? So this is another example, right? They do this a lot. They make these creative decisions that are a little bit silly, but the reason is obvious. They really want you to appreciate the amount of work they put into it, right? It's sort of like the guy who buys a really expensive car. He parks it in the driveway because though he has a garage, he wants you to see his expensive car. Otherwise, why did he buy such an expensive car, right? So there's definitely a little bit of that there. I don't know what kind of syndrome that's called, but it happens a lot in this game where you see something and you're like, okay, that's a little weird. I guess they just wanted me to notice it. I see you, Sony Santa Monica. I see you. With all that being said, I think that wraps up everything I wanted to say about the bugs and the cutscenes and the stories. We're going to jump into the meat and butter of this review, which is gameplay mechanics. And we're back with more God of War. Sorry for the delay. I think we were previously talking about music and the performance. Really, this was another outing from Bear McCreary, and he knocks it out of the park. The soundtrack is fantastic. They actually snuck him into the game. I don't know if you saw that. There was a dwarf named Rabe, right? R-A, Bear spelled backwards, whatever that might be. R-A-E-B. And I think there's a dwarven town, and everybody is hiding or gone away, except for this one guy who's just strumming along on his banjo. I don't know. It doesn't really work narratively, but it's just Sony Monica doing Sony Santa Monica things, baby. They're just doing their things. I think it's cool that they put him in. Whatever, man. They're just making it happen. So, lots to love from the narrative. But let's talk a little bit about the gameplay. So, one of the most important things with a game like this is integrating the cutscenes into the gameplay, right? Now, back in the day, there would be a hard cut, right? I mean, that's why you'd call it a cutscene, right? It was like literally smash cut to, usually it was completely different pre-renderings that didn't look anything like the characters in the game. You'd have like these high fidelity people in the cutscenes, and then you'd go back into the gameplay and you'd be playing with, Mr. Potato Head. It doesn't look anything like the HD renditions. However, what's really cool is all the graphics in this game are rendered in engine. So you'd think, they'd have a greater cohesion, but I definitely think there's a bit of separation between the two that doesn't quite match right. And I think the team that was put onto the narrative in the gameplay was a little bit of the B team, because they were not given enough leeway really to get a lot of narrative in there. I don't think the writers were really thinking about what could we do to integrate the story into the gameplay enough. There is some lines that are delivered really well, and there are definitely some levels where that's not the case. In particular, the level with Kratos and Freya, they have a very deep back and forth conversation. Agrabota and what's his name? Atreus, it's drawn out, sure, but there's definitely some moments there where there's great dialogue while they're punching things. But for the most part, it feels like the narrative is only being progressed when you're inside of a cutscene, and that does not feel so well. There's a little saying that I've heard people say in reference to the superhero films, right? Because it's very common in superhero films for basically, you know, one character, especially in a Superman film, to grab the other character and for them to fly through the air. And the saying is that basically nothing's going to happen until they hit the ground. And that seems to always be the case with all these movies, where basically one guy grabs the other guy, they fly into the air, they punch each other, bam, 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 bam. But it isn't until they hit the ground that someone's going to actually get hurt or someone's going to actually die, or then they'll deliver, you know, whatever dialogue they need to deliver. And so basically anything that's happening in the air, you can completely forget, because it's almost non-canon. It doesn't have any relevance to the narrative of the story. And it felt like that a little bit with respect to the gameplay here, where basically you could kind of ignore whatever happens during the gameplay because the cutscenes are where it's at, and that didn't feel too great. I definitely think that Sony Santa Monica was punching a little bit below its weight there with respect to this feature, because I know they can do so much more with this system. We've seen studios in similar genres really knocking it out of the park. Who comes to mind? I have some examples here from Guardians of the Galaxy I want to pull up, but I just also want to mention that the sister studio, Sony Santa Monica, right? This sort of attractive older sister, whatever you'll call it, Naughty Dog, right, has definitely stepped up their game with this big time with The Last of Us 2. There is a ton of narrative that happens within the gameplay sections, and they do a tremendous job with that. They are definitely a gold star to look at, but Guardians is a little bit of a lesser known example, and I wanted to pull up just two examples here, which I think they do really well. Let me see if, can we just get a quick video here? Let's see if this is working. Check this out.
The Tathians do not like to be cold.
Try putting on a shirt.
See? He's so... Princess, watch out! Yeah!
So, you know, we're just looking at a cutscene right here. No, sorry, not a cutscene. This is gameplay, but it's fairly scripted gameplay. And they've done a really good job of sort of layering in a lot of the quirks and comments that you've come to love from these different characters throughout the course of the game. And they're chatting it up as, you know, this crazy stuff is happening. Talking about plot-relevant details, but also talking about, you know, just vibing, right? Just character development. And I love that. They do this really well. This is, you know, a fairly scripted sequence as far as gameplay goes. Let me pull up another example, which I think is a little bit more illustrative of what you could do in a dynamic environment. Check this example out. This is just from some random combat. See if we can get that HD up a little bit. 1080p, baby.
Okay, seems to me like this shit might be ground zero for whatever's happening. We gotta find Corel, get some real answers.
You have any idea where she is?
I'm thinking we check her office. I don't even know how...
They did a great job of that. Let me see. I think I already lost where I was in the video, but if I jump to that section again, they do a really good job of... let me see if I can catch this line. He says something along the lines of, oh, you know, should we focus on this one? I think that's great. Let me see if I can find it. Yeah, he says something like that, like, oh, should we focus on this one? And then there's other times whenever you're doing the call-outs for, like, Rocket to go do his ultimate ability, he'll say, like, okay, Rocket, you're in, right? Stuff like that. I mean, it seems like it's small, but it actually does so much because they do play off it with the narrative. And you saw how as soon as that combat encounter ended, they were immediately talking about, okay, where are we going to go next? What's the mission objective? They've definitely melded the two together in a much better way. And I think if you play this game, you're going to see just how often these characters are talking, and they keep it engaging the whole way through. Just for reference, you know, this is GDC Vault. This is also by Elon Ruskin, right? Definitely have a bit of a... I'm definitely a fan of Mr. Ruskin. There's a section here called AI-driven dynamic dialogue through fuzzy pattern matching. Empower your writers. Jeez, that's a bit of a mouthful there. But that is a awesome talk if you want to get to know a little bit about what that system looks like under the hood. I remember I was talking with another engineer who had worked on the system, and really they've done an incredible job of sort of porting that over from, I think it was Valve who sort of developed that approach, where basically, you know, you can have these different things that are happening in the combat environment, and you can have AI reacting to them in a really compelling way. As I said before, Last of Us is doing this really well. They'll do stuff like, oh, I saw him by the window, right? Go get him, right? And you know, they'll talk to the AI in a way that feels very intelligent. And I didn't quite see that here. There's also a lot of opportunity for, I think, the AI to help the character be a little bit less passive. Unfortunately, in this game, Kratos, the character you play as, you feel quite passive in a lot of the combat environments. We'll talk about this a little bit later, but I think the more and more that we can say, okay, this is not just some guy who you push a button and he shoots an arrow, but he's actually a character who thinks and plans and plots and is there to assist you as a true ally. I think that would be really impactful. So what could that look like? Well, maybe instead of having you call in every arrow that he's going to shoot, he could help let's say, manipulate the combat environment so he can motivate some of your actions, right? So one example of this could be, Atreus maybe stuns him, and then, just like the Guardians of the Galaxy are like, hey, focus on this guy. Atreus could be like, hey, his shield's down. And then that can give you some sort of indicator. Maybe UI can assist here, but to indicate to Kratos, hey, go fight this guy. I've just got him debuffed for whatever reason. And he could just sort of passively be doing that throughout the combat environment. He's not going to knock everybody off because these could just be debuffs, right? They don't necessarily need to chop off their health. But this is a way that you can kind of feel like, oh shit, he's doing something and I can now try to combo off of him. That would be really awesome. We'll talk a little bit about that later, but I think this game definitely could benefit from more, let's say, combos of different move sets and trying to sort of combine this with this versus I think a lot of the combat right now is basically management of ability cooldowns. And I think that's far less compelling than what it could be. So another idea could be manipulating the environment. We'll talk about level design briefly in the future, but one of the issues is that a lot of the levels are just these sort of open arenas with nothing going on. And I got to tell you, it's boring. It's very boring. There's a lot that we could be doing here, and there's through level design we can add a certain dynamic elements, which is to say a dynamism to the combat environment, which I think can, it can prevent more of a playground, right? There's something compelling about a playground because you see a slide and you say, oh shit, man, I want to slide down that slide, right? That's what's awesome, right? Because you see it and it's like, oh man, there's agency here, there's opportunity here, I can make something happen. And I think a lot of the times in these combat environments, it's just empty and it does not feel good. But what could it look like? Maybe we could have like a giant barrel or something hanging from the sky, with like a rope attached to it, right? They do this at various points throughout the game, but maybe you could tell Atreus to shoot out the arrow and then the giant crate could fall down and it could smash on some people and make them die, right? That could be pretty fun. Or we could have the AI try to motivate that, right? And try to support that player behavior. So that could look like maybe Atreus is like, hey, I've got a shot on this thing, lure them under. That could feel pretty cool. Or maybe Atreus could say, hey, stun him and I'll make this thing happen. One of the things that I thought would be nice early on in the game is I was like, man, Atreus should be able to like douse an enemy in oil or something. And then Kratos can use the fire blades in order to make the guy go on fire. That could be pretty awesome. And they actually do exactly that with the sigils, which I was so happy to see they put that in. But even that interaction came way too late for me as a player, and I was definitely pretty bored with the combat before they revealed that. So I think they should have gone deeper on that system. I think that's a great way that we can sort of combo the AI with the player character in a way that creates fun combos. Would have loved to see more of that. They did it well. They just could have been more of that. I honestly just wanted more and more of that kind of stuff. Okay. Yeah. Okay, and let's move on. So, gameplay mechanics. Let's talk about gameplay mechanics, okay? What is a gameplay mechanic? I want to say that there's another term that I'm going to use, which is a gimmick, okay? A gimmick is sort of a mechanic that gets used maybe like once. Okay, so a gimmick might be, there's an example in the game, let me see if I can pull this up, where Agrabota, she's our buddy. Let's check this out. Man, how do I set the default to this thing? It's like constantly the worst quality it could be. Check this out.
It's so dark down here.
Let me fix that.
Okay, cool. So basically, Atreus is saying, hey, it's so dark, I can't see where the fuck I'm going. Agrabota says, hey, I could light the torch, and then you'll be able to see in this level, right?
Wretches! A nest
And
of
then
them!
I think he has to push square or whatever in order to make that happen. We have a little battle, and this is during that crazy mission where you're doing nothing but extermination. But here there was another torch which he saw, and hopefully this guy's gonna understand. Okay, maybe he didn't realize it, but there we go. A nice big square, and he pushes it, and now Agrabota starts lighting the torches, and it's fun, right? This is an example of a gimmick. It's great. There's nothing wrong with gimmicks. I think they help break up gameplay. Another term for this might be a pace breaker, where basically we're just trying to get them thinking about something that's a little bit different than just punching people and killing people. I think that's all well and good. That's a great example of a gimmick. Another example of a gimmick might be this example here with the geysers. Let's check out what's going on here. Basically, you need to pass this hot water geyser. And what does he decide to do? Basically, he decides I'm going to throw my frost axe here, and that allows the water to get frozen, right? And they do a really good job with this gimmick of not only having it for a basic traversal, but there's also a few puzzles that tie into this gimmick as well. So I think that's great, right? Really, the more and more things we can add on to a single gimmick, that's what starts building it up to become a player mechanic. And I think that's sort of the difference. The gimmick is sort of a one-off thing, like Agrabota's Darkness. It honestly never comes up again. But in this case, freezing things with the axe is used a few more times. It's used in some puzzles. It's used throughout the duration of the game rather than just one level. And there's other things like the Sigils, which we'll get to later, which I think is probably the best mechanic of this game, which can be used in multiple scenarios, right? So I don't think there's actually scenarios in combat where you can freeze an enemy and he'll stay stuck. But you could definitely charge up the frost axe and throw it at somebody, right? So it's not quite the same, but it would be cool if you could freeze an enemy or maybe a limb of like a giant enemy, and maybe it'll do something, right? There is a boss battle, it's very far in the game, where you have to freeze an enemy still, and then you punch him a bunch of times, right? So it was clear, and I think Mahir Sheth had said as much, and the other designer, I think is his name, they had said as much that basically, the boss levels were where they wanted you to explore the gameplay a little bit more and explore some of these sort of one-off gimmicks and integrate them into the gameplay. However, you don't really see this frost axe in place when it comes to the fodder enemies. And so this game definitely feels a little bit like you've got the cinematics, which have, front row seats to a lot of the effort, right? And a lot of the polish. And then you've got the boss battles. And then under that, you have the fodder enemies. And it seems like the fodder enemies got the least love from narrative. They got the least love from some of the design, certainly level design. However, that's where the player's spending most of the time, right? So that's a little bit tricky. But I definitely think it's definitely a very weighted experience with God of War. You're going to have amazing boss battles, and I think the times in between are going to be somewhat forgettable. So let me talk about the mirrors, because the mirrors are such a badass mechanic. I love this. I loved it. I think this should have been a mechanic, but unfortunately it was relegated to certainly to gimmick status. Check this out. So basically the premise here, this starts as a bit of a puzzle. And what you do is you can see these sort of reflective surfaces within the level, and you can throw your axe at them. And then what it will do is it will calculate what is the trajectory bouncing off of this surface. And in this case, you want to line it up so that it will attack whatever this glass prism is up here above these gateways. And if you line it up just right and you throw your axe, it runs over here, it smacks that thing, and boom, the gate is open. This is a really cool gimmick, and it's an excellent pace breaker that helps, break up the combat and, find, how exactly do I line this up between these doorways? Again, it's just used for one level, which I think is perfectly fine for a gimmick, but I think it's always better if we could find ways to sort of, how do we surface this not only from a puzzle, but we want to bring it up, right? It's like it starts as a puzzle, then it goes into gameplay, then maybe a boss battle, and then I guess maybe gets a shout out in the cinematic or something like that. As something that actually happened. Let's say it's canon God of War. What the heck did I just do? Let's go over here, though, because I want to show you where this design falls flat, okay? Because this is badass. I think this is
Here we go again.
awesome, right? They did a really, really good job with... Sorry. This guy. They did a really good job with creating this this as a gimmick, right? But I'm going to show you now that they actually do try to pull this into a mechanic, and ultimately it just does not land with the player. So you're going to notice now that those mirrors were very creatively, and this is a testament to the level design team, thrown all around the map, right? So you'll see there's one right here. He just passed one to his right. And what this allows is something really compelling, right? I'm sort of feeling a little bit like the jungle gym I was talking about before, a little bit like I'm seeing the slide. I'm thinking agency. Maybe I could throw my axe and knock it off one of these mirrors, and it will hit the other one and ricochet and maybe bounce a bunch of people in the head, right? But what you notice about the player, right, and this is just some random guy, right? Mr. Game Clips. Clearly he's an accomplished gamer. He's got like tons of videos, right? Millions of subscribers and stuff like that. He doesn't interact with a single damn one of these things. And I have to tell you, that was my experience as well. And I played this game on the PS4, but I also watched my brother play on the... Sorry, I played on the PS5. My brother played it on the PS4. This was actually my Christmas present to him. I wound up buying the game twice because I loved it so much. But guess what? The players are just walking right past those mirrors. They're not interacting with them at all. And I think there's another example later on in the level. This is a really well... Like, the level design is beautiful here, right? Check this out. Here we're in sort of this great circular arena. This is a really cool designed level, right? The level design here is awesome. Where basically we've got a mirror here, you've got a mirror here, you've got a mirror back there. And check it out. They even tell you right here. They're like, hey, man, remember those mirrors? Well, we really want you to use them. And I think the majority of the player base is realizing, oh, you know what? It might just be easier for me to just slap this guy immediately, right? So I think that the majority of players are just completely not seeing that. They're just ignoring that. They definitely think this would have benefited from tutorialization with respect to the application of actually stunning enemies. So in the case of this, I think they just use it in order to show you how to break doors, and it's sort of implied in this puzzle solving context. They don't do a great job of sort of helping bridge this in the player's mind into the game. And so what I've seen in all the gameplay is that the players don't even interact with these things. So it's clear a lot of money, a lot of time went into this, right? You got to think about these features, right? These are expensive features to do, right? If this mirror system, right, or whatever it's called, Snowstone or whatever whatever the name is, right? Let's say this thing took a month, right, for one programmer to do. Programmer gets paid what? 120K a year, let's say. So that these mirrors, right? This is like a $10,000 feature if it took a month. Let's say it takes 2 weeks, right? Then it's $5,000 feature, right? Obviously, you know, this is back of the envelope calculations here, right? But the point is, this probably took a lot longer than a month, right? This is a really dope ass feature, right? And it's clear a lot of teams worked on this kind of thing, but it's just relegated to like back rank B tier gimmick, right? It's not surfaced well into the gameplay, and I think that is really a missed opportunity because it's fucking awesome. I think they did a fantastic job with that. I think one of the issues is just that. And this will come up later with, I think, the wombo combo with the sigils that I was referring to earlier, of having Atreus put the sigil on a guy and then having you go in there and put him on fire. The issue is that it's just not attractive enough. I think that's one of the issues. I think here it's a tutorialization issue where basically the player just... I honestly think that people who are playing this game don't even know that the mirrors are there. It just comes up in the side, and people are in the middle of a combat scenario, so there's no way you can expect a player to stop and read the text. It wasn't a smart decision to do that. But one of the problems here is that it's not incentivized enough. Even if you did know how to do it, you'd say, why would I go here and try to line up this perfect shot when... You know, the reality of the situation is I could do way more damage by just doing the ability cooldowns. That's kind of the problem here. You know, it's like I do think there's a lot of opportunity for like interesting gameplay of having, trying to set up and use the environment in the way that you want it to. But the problem is it doesn't do as much damage as just spamming these abilities. And so the result is, of course, the player is going to take the path of least resistance, as they always do, right? And so the case here is that, unfortunately, doesn't benefit you to spend the time to try and line up the perfect shot. And for what? A stagger, right? There's so many easier ways for you to achieve something like that in this game. If anything, it should be like a heck load of damage, maybe even knock him out or something, and then it should bounce off him and hit somebody else, right, or something like that. I think that would help to make this a little bit more compelling, let's say, from a gameplay perspective. So that's the mirrors. I think we're sort of walking the line here from pure gimmick to something that I think is, full-fledged mechanic here with the sigils. So I wanted to go a little deep dive into the sigils here. First of all, excuse me, the sigils are used in, just like the mirror, in a puzzle-like mechanic. So here's an example of that. I have to say, the visual ludology of this game, the visual language of this game is a little bit muddy. So here's something that they do. You've got these blue thorns here, and you can swipe at them with your blades of chaos. Right? He's going to do that. And that will light them on fire, and then this will go away, right? So there was thorns, I lit them on fire, and then they go away. Check this out. Okay. What are these things? Thorns as well? I would say so. Maybe they're mushrooms, so they look a little bit different. The difference here, though, is that you have to first do the sigil, and then you can do the fire. I guess it's a little glitchy. But this is a little bit confusing to the player. Okay, it's great that she does the call out with the dialogue, right? To say, hey, in this case you have to use the sigil, but it's not really clear. Why would I need to use the sigil to burn the mushroom branches when it came to these blue branches? I could just use the fire, right? They don't do a great job of explaining sort of the difference there, and the result of that is that the visual language of this game becomes a little bit muddy. And here's another example where, oh geez, am I a robot? Deep questions here. Check this out, okay? You're gonna see immediately what the problem is here from a design perspective. Check this out. All right, I see a box. It's covered with vines. What do I do? Okay, a little painful to watch, right? I mean, this guy obviously, he's trying to make a video. Maybe he's not spending time to figure it out, but what happened there is pretty obvious. He did exactly what the game told him to do. Put a sigil, put it with fire. Maybe you don't even use the sigil, you just put it with fire. Either case, it didn't work. He's like, what the fuck is this? I don't understand it. He moves on, doesn't give a shit, right? I think the same exact thing happened to probably more than half the players, right? Because they have established a visual language of, hey, here are the thorns. Sometimes they've got mushrooms. Sometimes they don't. The player's not going to remember that. They're going to get confused. Maybe there was a color differentiation, which I think is the case. But again, the player's not going to remember that. And they go here and they're like, what the fuck's going on, man? Why are my sigils not working? It's inconsistent use of the visual language, right? This is never something you want to do in game design. The sigils are a great mechanic, but they've also, there's a lot of mistakes here as well. Let's talk a little bit about this issue as well, which is just in terms of usage, right? You're going to see here, it's basically, it's the same issue coming up again and again and again. And the reason why I wanted to do a deep dive on sigils is because I think it is actually a really good teaching tool. Because I think the problems with the sigils are emblematic of a lot of the design problems in this game. Okay, check this out. So we're going over here, and we've got a bit of a puzzle. Now, this guy has already played this level, right? So he's going to solve it wicked fast, man. Way faster than I think the average player would. But certainly faster than I did, right? But he's coming over here, and again, we have a right-hand sort of tutorial element here. But right now, it's definitely got a lot more prominence. I think they did a good job with this compared to the little tutorial we got with the mirrors in the combat, right? This one takes its time a little bit more. I do think, though, yeah, okay, so they actually require you to push a button in order to close that. I think that was a smart decision. I think that was a really smart decision. You should have done that with the mirrors. I think a lot more people would understand it. And so what is it saying, basically? It's saying, hey, use multiple sigils to chain elements together towards hard-to-reach places. They grow in size and glow brighter when chained to each other. Okay, got it. Chain elements. makes sense. So what this guy does is he chains the sigils like this so that he can reach, okay, it looks like he just reloaded it because maybe he was confused or something. But he finally figured it out. You chain the sigils like this, and then what he could do is he can, light the thing that he can reach on fire, which is, it's an icon we've never seen in the game before, which is its own issue. But that's able to sort of burn everything else in the ground, and it looks great. So the idea here is basically, okay, I can chain sigils, right? Makes a lot of sense. Let's go to this other example. Okay.
These plans are the same as those we saw
Check this out. So we're here.
earlier. Frost should make quick work.
We're here, and what she says is basically, you can use the frost in order to prevent the poison.
I think we'll.
And so you think, okay, similar situation to what happened before, right? I don't know if this actually happens before or after. Let's see. It's from the same video. So this actually happens before. But from a design perspective, right, you're thinking, okay, it's a similar situation, right? I've got to get one thing and extend it to the other. So if you were perhaps a gamer, right, and you were just doing the previous level, you'd say, oh, okay, whatever I applied there should apply here, right? But it's actually not the case. They completely change the way that this gameplay works. Again, here they have a pop-up that quick goes away. I don't know why they did this. I don't understand this at all. They have some tutorials that pop up and they don't last. They have others that pop up and go away immediately. This seems to be one that you don't push X. I have to say, that did not make sense. I guess because they feel like they're confident you're going to get it through this narrative. But if you're going to get stuck on this puzzle, and I think I did. I think I just wound up like being like, what the fuck is this? And I think I just ran right through this puzzle because I was like not having it. If you're going to force a player to use a puzzle, right, I definitely think it's worth pushing the X because they're going to get stuck. They're either going to get stuck in the tutorial or they're going to get stuck in the gameplay. And you definitely want them stuck in the tutorial because they'll actually learn what they need to learn. So what's going on here? Instead of extending the power, the sigil prolongs the power, right? And this is actually a mechanic I think they never go back to again. That's not true. They use it in a few of the door puzzles, I think. But it's definitely not used in the gameplay. And the result is, again, the visual language, it's just getting a little bit muddy. You've got this idea that the sigils extend the power, but you've also got this idea that the sigils prolong the power, and that seems to be somewhat dependent on if it's ice or fire, or maybe it's just context dependent. It's not really clear, and I think that all adds up to something that's a little bit less than the sum of its parts, because it's a little bit confusing for a player to kind of connect all those things. This is supposed to come together in, I believe it's called the Nizhogg battle. Is that the name of this guy? Nidhogg. So here's the deal with Nidhogg, okay?
My sigils can amplify your.
Now it's another use of the sigils. Where basically, and I think this is actually the most compelling use of the sigils, where it's basically you can put the sigils on something, and then when you attack it, it'll do bonus damage or something like that, right? I think that's great. It's throwing it into the gameplay in the boss fight, which is a great way to sort of force the player to use a tactic that you want. This is great tutorialization in action. They did a fantastic job with this.
Your attacks.
Okay, he sees the sigils. Eventually he realizes, okay, here we go. We got to use the blades. And I think this tutorial stays on screen until you've actually successfully done it, which is definitely good. Looks awesome. Badass. Great. So he uses this. He does that. Now here's the bit where it gets a little bit tricky. Later on in the same boss fight, check this out. He says, hey, aim for my sigils, right? And this guy, he reloaded, so he actually knew what was going on. This is not the first time playing it. Every single player I have seen play this game has had the blades out when they were doing this attack. And Freya constantly says, use your other weapon, right? I've heard that voice line in my sleep. She says, use your other weapon, right? Because apparently, again, it doesn't make any sense. But basically, this particular sigil can only be attacked with the axe. So you have some sigils that can only be attacked with the blades, and some that can only be attacked with the axe, at least within the context of this boss fight. This is not a good decision, because basically there's no visual language difference. The only difference is basically the tutorial saying, hey, this is an axe one. And you can't tell, right? They're both purple circles. It doesn't make sense why you would need to use the axe one on this, because it's just, again, to amplify the damage. It doesn't make sense why you'd have to use the axe in this case versus the Blades of Chaos previously, when they just did a boatload of damage on this guy. And there's definitely some ways that they could have tweaked this, right? One of the ways that they could have done this is, they had 2 arrows, right? They had the green arrows and the purple arrows. They're switching between them constantly. I think there's a variety of characters who can do both. Or maybe it's just Atreus, I'm not sure. But they could have sort of based the magic systems around the 2, I forget, what do you call it? Like elements, right? Fire and ice. So maybe instead of having a purple circle and just a purple circle, you could do something like a red circle, and then the green attack could maybe be a blue circle or something like that. And then okay, if I see a blue circle, I attack it with the Frost Axe. If I see a red circle, I attack it with the Chaos Blades. Something like that, I think, would have read a lot cleaner visually. Of course, we've got accessibility issues with just relying on color. That's always going to be an issue. You're not going to have just a color difference. You're going to also want to change iconography. So maybe one is, I don't know, let's say some ice-like iconography is exiting it, so maybe little snowflakes are falling from it. Maybe the red one, fire, it's got like flames coming out of it or something like that. Anything to differentiate the two would have been a better visual language distinction, because right now it's literally the same exact circle telling you, Frost Axe versus Chaos Axe, Chaos Blades. There's no way to tell the difference. I don't agree with this decision, basically, is what I'm trying to say. With that being said, I think it was really good to incorporate this into the boss fight. I think the tutorialization was fantastic. I just think it's a little silly that you have to force them to use this one versus the other one. There are better ways to do this. Okay, purple doesn't map well to the red and blue. Let's pop it over here. Okay, here's the thing. Sigils are cool, all right? Real talk. Sigils are cool. The sigils are really cool. The sigils are, I think, the coolest gameplay mechanic in the entire game. And that's why I'm going into a deep dive on them, because I think there's some really great potential there. I think the mirrors could have been just as fucking cool also, right? But it's a design decision here mostly that I have some problems with, which is that I have seen a lot of players get immediately stuck on this. And right? The design team ran into this issue in their usability testing, because Freya has a dialogue line exactly for that. Use your other weapon, right? And I just think, I don't know. I just don't understand why they needed you to use the axe. I guess because they wanted you to say, hey, you could do power attacks with the axe too. But if that's the case, I think, man, there could have been different ways to do that, right? Even if it's like, we've got to suppress Nizog's ability, right? Maybe he's doing a little bit of a fireball or growing a fire, and you need to put it out by doing the sigil and doing the Frost Axe or something like that. There's a lot of different ways that we could have approached this. All right, let's move on. We've talked about the sigils. I love the sigils. They're great. The puzzles in general, I would say, were average to not good. I did a bit, and I thought some were really cool. I particularly love the puzzles that happen later in the game with the spear. I think all of the spear puzzles are excellent. I love the spear puzzles. The Frost Axe puzzles are the ones that gave me a little bit of trouble, let me tell you that. In the mines, in the Dwarven mines, there's a series of puzzles that play like gimmicks, right? There's one in particular where you got to stop some ore from going down a trough or something like that. And it's basically you have to put an ice barrage from the Frost Axe in front of a dynamically moving element before it makes it all the way to a certain location. That's never been done in the gameplay, and it never happens again. It doesn't make sense. The best puzzles, I think, well, I mean, let's talk about puzzle design in general. I think the best puzzles in the world are puzzles that probably have a very straightforward solution. You try it, and for whatever reason, that's not actually the correct solution. It just appeared to be the correct solution. Then you go back, you think about it, you view the problem from another perspective, and suddenly you realize, oh shit, if I actually come at it from this other angle, it works perfectly, right? And a lot of the spear puzzles literally work like that, where basically you see there's something coming out of the wall, you say, oh, I can't approach it from this angle. In order to complete the spear puzzle, you have to hit it exactly orthogonal, and then you approach it from a different angle, and suddenly it works. That's great puzzle design. That's, I think, the best puzzles that could be made in a game, right? Straightforward solution doesn't work, got to think from it a new angle, and then suddenly it happens, right? However, that's not necessarily the best pace breaker, right? Pace breakers are not necessarily puzzles. And so I think the best pace breaker is something where you try a straightforward solution and it works. That's not bad, right? Where a puzzle that might feel underwhelming, where you're like, oh, okay, this puzzle was too easy for me. I got it on the first try. I didn't even have to think about it. For a pace breaker, that's actually pretty good because you feel like, okay, I figured it out. Moving on was a nice little, you know, a little spice on top of my combat, mixes it up a little bit, right? The puzzles for the mines were unfortunately not puzzles, I think, that could be mapped very well into the combat. And I think that's another axis of which puzzles should be evaluated when it comes to this sort of game. Because I think for this sort of game, you don't need a puzzle that's the perfect puzzle I defined earlier. I think you just need a puzzle that's going to teach the player in some way how to solve the combat puzzles that are going to be presented to them later. Because the meat of the game, right, I think, at least in my opinion, is probably the punching and the kicking and the killing and the slashing and the hashing and all that shit, right? It's not necessarily, right, Kratos is not known as the god of puzzle solving, right? So he's known for fucking kicking ass, right? So I think for the most part, the puzzles are there to sort of teach players how to use this thing and as pace breakers. And so a lot of the puzzles where you've got to sort of solve this gimmick in a certain way and it doesn't ever come up again in combat, I don't think those puzzles were a great fit for this particular game. Moving on. Gameplay. You know, the worst part about the gameplay is the worst part about some very parts of the narrative, which is just at times it can be very slow. And the game suffers from some serious pacing issues. That's the case. We talked about Agrabota being slow. Whereas there's other missions that are great, where basically Freya and Kratos have a really great balance between talking narrative, getting gameplay done, traversing levels in a level design that loops slightly, but not in a way that feels dizzying or gets you lost, right? I think that all comes together very well. And to be honest, this is something that we kind of come to expect from these kind of games. The truth is that not all the levels are designed by the same designers, right? And so sometimes you get one designer who really resonates with the kind of game you want to play, and other designers might take things in a different direction, right? Just the same, from a high-level perspective, they want the levels to feel different, right? And so some are going to gel with your gameplay, some aren't. I think that's fine, but I definitely think that you know what? Here's something that someone told to me when I was hanging out with the Sony Santa Monica boys and girls. They said to me that all 8s make a 10. That was a little bit of a quote I heard, okay? And the idea behind that, I think, when they were launching the first God of War, or I should say the fourth God of War, the reboot, 2016, is that, you know what? The UI, I think it was the UI, forgive me if I'm wrong, I think it was the UI was particularly bad. And so out of 10, you might say the UI was like 3 out of 10 or something like that, right? Whereas a lot of the other parts of the game were really great. You'd have an 8 here, a 9, and maybe even a 10, right? When it comes to, I don't know, whatever, pick your favorite part of God of War 2016, right? The issue they observed was that the UI being well below sort of the bar that was expected of players, it brought down the whole experience in totality. And they didn't actually need to get the UI to 10. The UI didn't need to be the they didn't need to win all those awards that maybe the Destiny team did, right? All they needed to do was get the UI to be passable. They needed to get the UI to a stage that it didn't get in the way. It didn't need to be the star, right? It just didn't need to get in the way. And so if they brought the UI to an 8, then suddenly the game would be 10 out of 10. Even though some of the components were, less than 10, in let's say, conjunction, I guess, together, they were greater than the sum of their parts. And that's what we're always hoping for, right? So even if there's a mission, there's an element of the game that might, fall a little bit short of the mark, that doesn't mean that the game does itself. Oftentimes, if every little piece can kind of be pushed up to a level that is at or above what a player is going to be expecting, then the whole experience can be far above what the player is expecting. Just because, there isn't one sort of a loose nail, right? It just sort of looks very, very proper, and I think that's certainly the case here, where there may have been some issues here and there with visual language and pacing and story and narrative and, all these bugs and stuff like that, right? But I think altogether, it adds up to a really great game that sort of hopefully is better than the sum of its parts, let's say. Okay, rant over. Let's move on. What was I talking about? Let's talk about dynamic elements in the levels. So I chatted about this a little bit, where basically a lot of the levels are real talk. I need to say something that's a little bit spicy here. Okay. Let me tell you something. Is this thing on? A lot of the levels in God of War Ragnarok, a lot of the levels are a little bit bland. Now, I'm not talking about the puzzle sections. I think the puzzle sections are awesome, and the level designers found a lot of creative ways to use the limited abilities that Kratos had in order to create compelling puzzles that Kratos had to solve and traverse throughout the different levels, right? The geysers is a great example of that. But when it comes to the combat arenas, it was consistently the same exact arena in nearly every single level. Let me describe this arena to you. Imagine a flat plane. Okay, that's it. That's the arena. Basically just flat ground, okay? A soccer field, if you will. A baseball field, if you will, right? Though imagine the batter's cage is gone, right? Just a flat plane. That is the vast majority of all the levels you're going to see in God of War. It's a little bit frustrating. There's some levels where they switch it up a little bit, and you've got one elevation, and you've got another elevation. And that's it. That's about as creative as the level design goes. And I understand why they did that. It was definitely a creative decision to try and... Hold on, I gotta go. Hey folks, sorry about that interruption. I'm back, and I believe we were talking about how the levels were a little bit flat, literally. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I don't think it's an issue. But I do think that it could have been improved. I think that the levels would have benefited from more dynamic elements that the player could have interacted with, give them a little bit more player agency, feel like they can kind of create their own combos, explore the play space a little bit more, give that jungle gym effect, that playground effect where you've got the slide over here, the swing, et cetera, right? Things that you can interact with. And what else is in a playground than a slide and a swing? I guess maybe the sandbox or something. Give a player, that's what they call it, a sandbox. Give the player a sandbox environment where they can play around with different elements in order to create some cool stuff. I'm not the only one who thought that, apparently, because there are a few of them in the game, though I think they could be improved. There's definitely another issue here, which we've seen quite a few times, with visual language issues. Let me show you this quick illustration here. Okay, so check this out. So the player's in combat right now, and when the player's in combat, they cannot open the chests, okay? The chests are basically these rectangular prisms you find around the map. There's a few kinds of chests, and in order to indicate to the player they cannot open the chest, they show a little white circle. That is the icon that says, hey, you can't open this. You have to kill nearby enemies. Okay, fair enough. There's another rectangular prism that appears in the combat environment, and this is actually one you're supposed to interact with. And guess what? It's a circle. They use a circle as well in order to show you that, hey, you can interact with it. It's literally a circle. And I think that's actually a button press, maybe? Or I mean, that doesn't look like a button. Maybe it's going through some sort of animation. Oh, it's actually X. So it's not even the circle button that you need. Well, first of all, don't show the player a damn circle if it's not the circle button, right? That's just confusing. But when the button does appear, it's an X, so it's something different, right? So I guess it's trying to say, hey, you can't interact with it because you're too far away, but there's a circle outline there, which I guess means maybe you're beyond the radius in order to interact with this thing before it turns into an X. I honestly don't know what they were thinking here, but it does not work. I was running around the environment, I saw these things, and I thought, oh shit, this is just like the other rectangular prisms that I can't interact with the circle above it. The player, oftentimes with this stuff, it's very visceral, right? You've sort of got to, it's just pattern recognition here. And you see a box, you see a circle over it, and you say, oh, this is something I can't interact with. I have to clear the environment. And the one-on-one mapping really couldn't be any less perfect in this case, right? It's a really frustrating example of sort of the visual language just contradicting itself. With that being said, what do you notice in this example here, right? This guy, Game Clips, clearly, I think he killed every single person in the arena, and then he was left with the brick, and so he winds up grabbing it and being like, what the heck's this? And he just throws it randomly, right? I think the same exact thing happened to me, where basically I had seen them in the arena, and I was running around, and I'm like, what the hell is this? I guess I can't do anything with it. I fight all these guys, and then suddenly I have them left over. And it wasn't until maybe the second or third arena that I've seen them where I'm like, okay, now I know what these things are. I can interact with them. And so, yeah, I think it's just an example of sort of something that definitely could be intuitive, and the player could pick it up and understand it immediately, just sort of missing the mark. What's frustrating about these things in particular is that this mechanic of showing the these little things that you could throw at people, it's great. I think it's definitely in line with the Kratos theming, but it's definitely in gimmick territory. It's one-off. I think it does a hefty amount of damage, but it's not something that I think the player is going to feel like they add as a mechanic into their arsenal. And it's also fairly infrequent. It's not every arena that has these things sort of set up. I think there are other games that do this really well, and so I wanted to show off one. This is a little gem called Grab by the Ghoulies, and it's pretty frequent in this game that you're going to be running around and grabbing stuff, and that's really the whole idea of the game. I think in this case he's holding a pot or something, and so he grabs this pot and he can throw it at these people. So there are little objects all over this game world that our protagonists can interact with, and that's fun. And one of them I think would have been a really good mapping into this game world. Check this out. He comes over to this play box, and immediately once he enters this radius, this AI comes close enough to the play box for something bad to happen to him. I think this is actually, I'm not sure whether or not this was just dynamic or if this was actually scripted AI so that they would get into the radius of the box when he comes near it. But the player chooses to interact with this box, and it looks a bit like this. All right, so we got a bit of a cut camera there, but he spins around and he slams everything next to him. I feel like this kind of interaction would work so well within a God of War. And it is the case here that the box becomes broken in some way, so it's a one-time use kind of thing. It's obviously very powerful, and the player wants to plan his attack strategy around getting all the little dudes centralized, getting them around him, and then finally he could do this huge attack, which should hopefully knock out a ton of them. In this case, it only knocks out one. But again, if you were in a repeat level, you could do this. And there are other levels within this game where you have this sort of toy box mechanic. You could run around and hit everybody in a radius. And in that case, I think it can be reused. So it's not always the case that it destroys immediately. And I think it would be cool to see something like this in God of War. I think it would map really well to the general gameplay or ludology, if you will. Okay, so yeah, the visual language of the rocks, it's a bit muddy, and it definitely undermines the visual language of the game. But this is a consistent issue with this game. Once upon a time, I was taking a math test. Okay, I was in grade school and I was doing a math test. And I remember there was a certain kind of math problem that I was not very good at. I don't remember what it was, but let's pretend it wasn't. I think this was in high school, but let's pretend it was in primary school or something. And it was multiplication with, I don't know, maybe it was PEMDAS, right? Maybe it was PEMDAS. And let's say I was confused about whether or not the division came before multiplication or something like that. Let's say I was trying to learn math, but I was also dyslexic and I got all the letters mixed around. Okay, something like that. And here's the deal. I had to do this test, whatever it was, and I got every single question of a certain kind wrong because I just didn't understand this one little thing, right? And so at the end of the day, I got this test back, and maybe I got like 5 questions wrong for one particular thing that they were trying to teach me, and the result was I got like a much lower score. Maybe I got like a 70, because 75, let's say, because each one counted off for 5 points. When in reality, it was just this one little thing I misunderstood, so I should have only like lost 5 points. But because it was applied applied to every single of these 5 problems, it multiplied by 5, and so I got like 25 points off. All of that is to say, I'm definitely not doing that in this review. I think the visual language issues are an issue that presents itself in many different problems, and it's consistently that this team is making this mistake. But again, I think it's just one little thing, right? So I'm happy to chalk it off as like this one little thing. I think on the second or third level, you're going to figure it out. You're going to get it. And it's one of those situations here where, yes, it's definitely something that could be improved, but it's not something that hurts the overall game. And I think at the end of the day, it's still going to be a 10 out of 10 experience if that was the only thing that's the issue, right? Here's the thing, though. That's not the only thing that's the issue. And I'd like to read this paragraph to you, which I think explains a little bit of where I'm coming from. But while I do that, I want to demo, I want to just let this combat interaction play out. So hopefully you can hear me. If not, I'm going to make it a little quiet. You know, the truth is sorry, I don't know how loud this is. You know, I'm just going to mute it because the visuals are not actually very important. Or sorry, the sound is not very important. The visuals are important. Let's see if we can get this displayed here. Okay, cool. So here is the gameplay. Here's the issue, pal. Okay, the issue is that I would say the majority of the levels in God of War Ragnarok, right? So we talked about some problems, right? There's definitely some technical issues that have gotten in the way of story. There's certainly some issues with design and visual language. But I don't think any of those really like impede the experience, right? Maybe the technical issues, you know, getting crashed to like the desktop of PlayStation Home, right? That's definitely a pain in the ass. But for the most part, I would say the greatness that is this game, and this is a great game at the end of the day, shines through a lot of those problems. I think there are some things, though, that are a little bit more fundamental that need to be addressed, and this is one of them. This is something that I think is actually kind of a serious issue. Should we go over to the serious cam? I can't remember my script from there. So we'll just show it here. But what I want you to notice in this gameplay is the lack of target prioritization. It's extremely common, especially in the earlier levels of God of War. We're talking like maybe the first 10 hours or so. You'll enter a combat encounter and it will just be the same enemies, like 5 of the same enemy. And there's no diversity with respect to the enemies you're fighting, and the result of that is no target prioritization. Target prioritization is where you see, like, oh, there's a healer over here, there's a ranged enemy over here, and now I've got to make some interesting combat decisions with respect to which one I take out first. Maybe this guy's buffing this guy, so I try to take out the guy that's buffing him first, and hopefully it's done in a way that I can make choices, right? It's not prescriptive, let's say. However, in God of War here, as you're going to see, there isn't a lot of decision-making here, and it sort of blends together into a bit of monotony. You'll see that I just go punch this guy, and then this guy's the same guy, so I go punch this guy, and this guy, and this guy, and it sort of all blends together a bit. Okay, so here's what I wrote here. The combat, which is to say the core of the game, kept feeling a bit too repetitive. I appreciated the different enemy types, but I noticed that whenever they would create a new type of enemy, the encounters would only have that type of enemy. Now, there's a great value to a diversity of enemies, but if you're only getting one type of enemy in each encounter, then you don't feel that diversity on the battlefield. I recall how Halo did a great job of creating combat scenarios with orthogonally differentiated enemies, which means, you know, they all attacked in different ways, they had different weaknesses, that made combat encounters feel choice-driven. But in these encounters, it feels like you're either going to punch guy number 1 or guy number 2, and the order doesn't really matter. So a lot of that creativity is taken out of the combat. Now, I don't love the puzzles in this game, but I wish that I could engage with the puzzle mechanics in the game through the medium of combat. The combat decisions on how specifically to use the attacks versus just checking whether or not I can use one at a certain time is one of the ways in which I think this is lacking as well. The damage is weighted so heavily on these abilities that you never feel incentivized to set up this combo of like, oh, this guy's a high priority enemy, so I might target a sigil here and then do a wombo attack on him to prioritize that sigil. Instead, you're just constantly playing this game of ability cooldown management where you're just using every ability you can as soon as it's ready, and pop, 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 you get him, and hopefully you get a prompt to push the button to do a glory kill, and that takes him out, right? This particular level that we're looking at is particularly frustrating, right? Because it's literally just one enemy type, and and it's not done in a way that's incredibly compelling. But I think there's other issues as well, where it's constantly just kind of one enemy, and it can get a bit frustrating, where basically you feel like it's a bit of a monotony. It's a bit of a hack and slash kind of thing. Not to say that's bad, right? I mean, it's a genre, right? But there's ways to do it that I think could definitely improve this experience. Okay, so hopefully that covers a bit of what I was talking about there. Just want to touch on a bunch of quick topics here. Let's pump it over here. So, a bunch of quick notes. These are things that I didn't have footage for, but I just wanted to touch upon really quickly. I wanted to note that the rage mode was a little finicky. I noticed that it sometimes would not start. I think you had to hold it down, both of the buttons. That was a little bit complicated for me to do. I had some trouble with that, and I noticed that my brother, when he was playing it, he also had some issues with that. So it might be something to look at. I also had this issue where I got stuck with no health for a few minutes, and I didn't have any healing nearby. So I think something like a very, very basic health regen would be nice, especially when you're outside of combat and you just got, we call this in the industry Call of Duty jelly, because whenever you'd get shot in like one of the old Call of Duty games, you'd constantly have like this, it looks like strawberry preserves that are like smashed all over your screen. And the result of this system, where basically you don't have regenerative healing, is that you're walking around with this jelly jam all over your face for a while, right? There's some games that definitely have this issue. And God of War does a pretty good job of sort of having these little gemstones of health dynamically spawn if you're walking through these passageways after maybe a difficult battle, so that you don't have that issue. But I still saw it happening. So honestly, I don't really see what the issue is of having just a basic health regen. Or maybe you regen after a battle or something like that. I'm not sure why they don't do that more. Early on, I noted that I liked Atreus. Let me see what I said here. Okay, I just wanted to say that early on I did notice that I was looking for Atreus to sort of give me a bit of a wombo combo where he might give them oil and then I could turn it on with fire. And I did notice that the Sigils provided that later. I think I said as much previously, but I just wanted to note again that I did feel that need a little bit earlier on in the campaign, and so it was delivered later, but I think it would have been cool earlier, and more stuff like that would have been definitely welcome. Okay, let's talk a little bit about progression in the game. I think that the random upgrade resources in general are a little bit annoying. So the way that this game works is basically you kill a guy and then you get like the eye of the newt or something random like that, or the timber, the frozen marshmallow or something, right? The golden acorn. You grab this random thing and then suddenly that allows you to upgrade the bow or something like that. I don't get it. I just don't get it. I didn't get it in the first one. I don't get it in this one. The progression feels weird. I think I think it would be so much more impactful if the items were somewhat contextualized within the game, or instead of like some random upgrade resources. I don't think the RPG mechanics work in this game. Maybe something like, for example, there's a really, really good narrative contextualization of one armor upgrade, which is that when you are hanging out with Odin, he says, "Hey man, go to your quarters. I gave you a new bow. Check it out." I love that. I think that's awesome. Of course, you can't do that for every single thing, but I would have much preferred to find some of the bow upgrades through the chests that are scattered around the world, instead of like 250 hack silver or whatever the random thing they throw into the buckets are these days. With that being said, I really wasn't compelled by the game's economy. I didn't really understand the whole hack silver and how that fit into everything. I thought they did a really smart job with splitting the experience pools between the different characters. So if you get a lot of experience on Kratos and you haven't spent it on any ability points and then you want to do so, that doesn't affect any of the ability points that you could spend on Atreus or any of the other NPCs that you hang out with. That was an awesome design decision. Very, very smart. It's great because it helps incentivize me to upgrade some of the trees for characters who maybe I'm not as, excited about, and I get to explore with every single one. With that being said, the combat designers and some of the interviews I've seen of them have definitely lauded this idea of exploring a lot of the different equipment sets, and I did not find an overwhelming amount of experience points in order to do that. So I don't know if the balancing accurately reflected what their goal was, or if they just felt that it wouldn't be until you are sort of at the end game that you'd be able to sort of farm experience in order to level up some of the different armors in order to test out which one works with which ability. But it was frequently the case where I'd have a level 2 armor, and I would be faced with the choice of, like, do I bring another shitty armor of, like, level 1 to level 2, or do I take this one that I'm currently using to from level 2 to level 3? And of course, I'd prefer to take the one that's level 2 to level 3 rather than bringing another one up to just, be at parity considering the level of whatever I'm currently using. So I felt that way. Maybe there is some scaling with respect to how much experience is needed to circum certain level thresholds. I'd assume so. But even with that, I just didn't feel great incentivization to explore the combat playstyles with respect to the different gear upgrades. In summary, the RPG mechanics just weren't there for me. I didn't get it. In the different people who I observed, they weren't really experimenting with this either. So maybe there could have been a better way to encourage that experimentation. Let me pause for a moment here. Hey, folks, sorry about that. I had to cough. I had to cough a bit. I forgot what I was talking about. I think it was something about the RPG mechanics, but I wanted to show you. So here's an issue also. I noticed when I was observing my brother, and this was an issue with my brother before, because he had played through the Star Wars game. I think it was, not Star Wars, Spider-Man. He was playing the Spider-Man game by Insomniac, and I went to his account, and I think he had pretty much beaten the game, and I went to his stats, and I realized that this kid had, like, thousands and thousands of experience points that he could have upgraded so many different things, but he just never opened the damn menu to actually do so. And I think this game sort of falls into that same trap where I've noticed the players that I'm watching are not spending the time to upgrade their trees. And I don't really think the game does a very good job of contextualizing when's an appropriate time to do so. Of course, we can ask players to do that whenever, they want to do it. But I think we've seen some examples in this industry of how to encourage the player to sort of make those decisions. And I think I might have seen a pop-up in this game, but I think there's some better ways to do it. I just wanted to show you this really great example, in case you're not familiar with it already, from Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. Check this out. This is incredible. This is the gold standard, or platinum standard, whatever you want to call it, when it comes to this kind of mechanic. Just for context, we're looking at some gameplay here from this guy named Source Spy 91. And this is a Dark Souls-like game where basically you need to reach a checkpoint in order to save your game, let's say. And in this case, the gameplay contextualizes the checkpoint system as meditation circles. And so as we approach this meditation circle, we get the prompt to do the save game, which will respawn the enemies in the area, but it will also save our progress. He goes to do so. He sits down into the meditation, and then check it out. This is actually not just a meditation circle. It's also a skill tree, which beautifully visually depicts the skills in front of him. And I don't actually know if he's going to go forward with the skill tree. No, he's just going to do a little rest. And look at the bottom there. It says 1 skill point available. It's great. It's showing the player that, hey, you're missing out on this opportunity if you choose to not engage with it. And he actually chooses to do it. So he pushes the skill tree, and that immediately transitions to this beautiful depiction of all the different skills that he can spec into if he wants to invest that 1 skill point into, it looks like, categories of Force, Lightsaber, and Survival. This is fucking amazing. So fucking smart, right? I can't get over how good the design is for this, because this is a constant issue with so many games where they're not investing their experience points. The fact that they found a way to build this into the narrative and get the player to constantly put this in front of their damn eyeballs so that they actually see, oh shit, I've got this experience points. These are the places I could spec into. And not only that, but you're building this beautiful tableau of these different iconographies that are lighting up and connecting in interesting ways. It just feels like you're creating something really cool here at the same time. This is really fucking cool, right? I think this team absolutely knocked it out of the park. I haven't seen anything even close to this. But that's not to say, God of War is behind the pack there. I think they're fairly middle of the road when it comes to this sort of thing. But I think in terms of visualizing that progression, hey, I've seen it done better, and I think I aspire to make games that can hit this standard. This is really fucking good. I think this is quite difficult to do, but there's certainly a lot of ways where you can adopt elements like this into your progression system that I think could look cool. God of War does, like, don't get me wrong, God of War does have a little bit of a skill tree that looks like this, but it's hidden in, like, the third menu of the you got to pull up the menu, and I think you got to, like, tab over, like, 3 times or something like that. So it's cool, right? But it's definitely not as cool as having it in the game world like these guys had. And I think there probably could have been a way to make that happen. Certainly, right? When you think about God of War, the Kratos axe, I think you could actually see the runes that are embedded within the literal axe, right? And it's sort of just a little polish note that the axe runes change. But what if the axe was the literal like diegetic menu that you could use in order to swap out the runes? And maybe he visually takes the rune out and puts a new rune in when he wants to embed the axe with a new ability. There's so many ways that we could do this kind of mechanic, that we could do this kind of, I don't know, design pattern in God of War. It'd be awesome to see them experiment with this kind of thing. Okay, so God of War is you know, I think 7 or 8 when it comes to this thing, but you want to talk about who's 10 out of 10? I think Star Wars is kicking ass on that. Okay, let's talk a little bit about difficulty. Difficulty. This is going to be a little bit of a real talk situation. So let's take a little moment here to talk about difficulty scaling. Okay, this is a tough conversation to have because the truth is, it's just my opinion, and there's a lot of people who are going to disagree with me here. If there's a hot take that I've got in this video, it's definitely going to be this one because I think I'm a little bit against the tide with respect to this opinion. But here's the deal. I think that the player fantasy, the narrative is clearly very, very important to this team, right? They've invested so much money and so much engineering effort behind the narrative. It's clear that they want to honor that. But I think that the gameplay difficulty in many ways undermines the player fantasy, the player story. Let me tell you what I mean by that. In I guess the Western canon, the closest example I would think of as like a god in popular media would be Superman. Now, Superman, he's got a lot of media about him, right? He's got video games, he's got comic book, he's got movies. Superman's got a few things that are true about him, right? And one of the things that's true about Superman is he can't get killed by bullets. Bullets, I think, just bounce off his chest, right? So if you were making a video game about Superman, it really would not make sense for the bullets to deal more damage, because at the end of the day, Superman don't get hit by bullets, right? Superman's not going to die from getting shot by a bullet. So if they do more damage, it doesn't make sense, right? It's not a good way to scale the difficulty of Superman, right? Because Superman's not going to get killed by a bullet. Similarly, in God of War, it does not make sense for the fodder enemies to scale the amount of damage that they're doing against Kratos. I think it seriously undermines the player story, because Kratos is not going to die to a fucking lizard biting his shoe, right? But the issue is that when you get into the higher difficulty modes, right, and I experimented with all of them for the sake of this review, that's exactly what happens. And the result is, give me God of War mode does not feel like give me God of War mode. Give me God of War feels like little bitch mode, because this fucking salamander bites my shoe and a third of my health is gone. That does not feel good. And I think it seriously undermines the player fantasy of being a fucking God of War, right? I'm not going to die because a freaking salamander bites my toe, right? I'm the God of War, right? So, that was very frustrating. I think it makes sense to have damage scaling work in the boss battles, right? Because I'm fighting Thor, God of Thunder, right? But when it comes to the fodder enemies, I think there's a number of ways which they could have done a better job of that, right? So, for example, with Superman, maybe it's not that the guys do more damage to Superman, right? Frequently in comic books with Superman, the issue is not, you know, if someone's going to kill Superman. The issue is how many of the people can he save, right? He goes to the different humans and he tries to save them. And maybe a very difficult level in Superman can be, oh, you know, you can't let a single hostage die, right? Something similar to my favorite video game, Dead Rising, where you're trying to save all these characters. Maybe the hardest difficulty for Superman is like, not a single person can get harmed by the bad guys, because the truth is whether or not the bad guys harm you is not part of the question, because they can't, right? Because you're a fucking god, right? When it comes to God of War, maybe something similar to that could have been applied, or maybe it's just the number of enemies that you're fighting. I'm not sure, but the damage scaling alone just didn't seem like a great fit for this kind of game. Okay, let me jump over to the other camera, because I wanted to add the designers into this discussion, because they actually do have a few things to say about this. I was checking out this interview by them, and here's what one of the designers had to say. I think this guy's name is Yu.
And the difficulties, will they scale throughout the difficulties? Is there like, let's say, me playing a game in God of War, are enemies like more aggressive than the enemies in Give Me a Story, for example? Just like a general brief there.
Yeah, from the difficulty standpoint, short answer, yes. There's a lot of things under the hood that we do to enemy behaviors based on difficulty, right? So like one common thing is like how many enemies can be engaged with you at the same time, right? On easier difficulties, usually there'll be 1 or 2. On Gimme God of War, you might have like 3 or 4 enemies attacking you, like right in your face at once. There's also a lot more like mix-up branches. So like what we call mix-ups will be like when an enemy comes and attacks, and then they follow up with a different attack. But based on what attack they do, you as a player have to respond in a different way, right? You might need to parry the next attack, or you might need to dodge the next attack. There's a lot of all these small little like tuning things that we do based on difficulty that really adds to just the experience beyond just like the amount of damage and damage you do and the amount of damage you take, right? I think that's a big part of it, right?
Okay, cool. So sorry, his name is not you. It is maybe with an exclamation point. Maybe it's I think this guy added that in. It's just Denny. Excuse me. It's Denny. Really eloquently spoken here. Clearly, this guy knows what the hell he's talking about. So it seems that there are there's other factors at play there. It's not just a base damage scale change, but I gotta say, it doesn't feel good to get bitten by a salamander and die as a God of War. I do think it undermines the player fantasy. It would be cool if there was another way for them to scale that, because it just felt a little bit funky when I was playing the game. I constantly was like, what the hell? These guys are these guys are punching pretty hard for, freaking rodents, right? It just didn't make sense to me. So that was a little bit frustrating. What else did we got here? So yeah, difficulty scales in other ways. Apparently the armor scales now instead of being tiered. So this was an issue with the last game, as I understand it. The last game, the armor was tiered in such a way that you could have maybe bronze, silver, and gold armor, and the situation was such that you were never going to use bronze armor in the end game, because of course you just use gold armor, because that's the best. However, in this game, all of the armor can be scaled independently, and that's a huge win from the design side. So credits to the design team. I'm sure that was not easy to do in order to make all of these different combinations viable in the end game, but I'm sure that allows the player to sort of experiment in a lot of cool, creative ways. However, I will say I did not experience the mixing and matching that they mention. Oh, here, I got another link to the interview. Let's hear what they have to say about that.
Also, in testing, we found that there's actually a lot of, like, if you actually take one armor set from something else and then you take this other gear that was actually meant from this other build and you put them together, they might actually be stronger than some of the intended builds, if you might. So, like, we definitely keep the options very open in terms of like the experimentation, because we want to be surprised, like when the game's in the hands of everyone. And when.
Okay, yeah, so there's a few more notes there from Denny. I didn't get to talk to Denny too much. I've definitely spoken a lot with Mihir. But hey, they've got an amazing design team there. It's obviously one of the best in the world, right? And so they definitely know what they're talking about. I'm curious, though, when they said they're testing, because I did not see a lot of the players I was spectating were mixing and matching that much, so maybe it's just the case that you only start seeing that testing in the end game. But I found that, especially as a player who was progressing through the campaign fairly straightforward, I wasn't doing a lot of the side quests, I found that I was constantly at a, I did not have a lot of experience points to freely experiment with the different combinations. So maybe they could have made some way for me to experiment and then, I don't know, like test stuff out. Maybe there could have been better ways to incentivize that. I'm not too sure. We know for a fact that when players find something that's working, they're just going to constantly do that one thing. They're not going to want to try to learn something new. It's just the way players work. So it would have been nice to kind of have gameplay systems that encouraged a little bit more of the experimentation to basically underscore the amount of work that went into supporting the modularity that this game clearly has, apparently, according to the designers, right? The designers are going to always tell you, their their idealized vision of the game, right? It's not always in reality what most players experience, right? But this is how it goes, right? Another thing I wanted to talk about is the controls were fully remapped. Now, that was definitely the thing that frustrated absolutely the most. That was the number one thing that I complained about when I was playing the first God of War game. I could not rebind the controllers, and I am somebody who rebinds the controllers all the damn time, right? There's a lot of issues, I think. I could go on a whole rant about controllers, but one of the let me pull the controller out real quick. One of the main problems I have constantly with games these days is that they will bind things to buttons that do not make any sense, right? So, for example, with the modern controller, you're going to want to have, darn, I wish I had an overhead camera or something like that, but you're going to want to have your fingers on the thumbsticks at all times, right? So whenever there's certain there are certain grips that people will do that are a little bit crazy. I think one's called the claw, where you position your hand in such a way that you can touch the face buttons while never removing your, what would it be, your thumb from the joystick here, and your front fingers, your pointer index finger and your middle finger from the various triggers in the front here. So there's different ways that players have tried to deal with sort of the limitations of the control, but oftentimes it's actually an issue with the button mapping. And that is the case here, where I think it's either the dodge roll or the shield is placed in a weird way where you have to abandon your control, basically your home base when it comes to where your fingers lay on the controller, unless you're going to adopt one of those wild clutch grips or crab grips, whatever it's called. So there's definitely some issues there, but I've talked to the team about this. This is something I talked to the team when I met them, and I think it's just the case that basically you have to go with the established principles of whatever PlayStation is pushing. So, I think it was probably a lot of work to get the controllers as rebindable as they are, and it's fantastic that they were able to succeed in that endeavor. And now I can rebind the controls to be, whatever crazy combination that this guy who's a gearhead when it comes to mechanics can do. So I love that. I really, really appreciated that. One of the things that I thought would be particularly cool is if I could demo these attack combos so that I could immediately test out what they were like. So, for example, it's quite frequent in the game where you might unlock a new combat ability, and I want to test it out, right? But unless I'm in front of fodder enemies right now, there's no way for me to do that, right? So I might upgrade an ability, let's say, in the middle of a boss battle, and there's no one really for me to test it on than the boss itself. Or more frequently, I'm upgrading abilities at a time of relative peace where I've just finished a battle and I've got some experience, or maybe I'm just at a lull in a story moment, or I'm bored as heck on an Agrabota mission and I'm like, hey, this might be a good time for me to upgrade my skills. But when I do so, I realize, oh shit, I just finished the combat, or I'm not in combat, and now there's no one for me to actually test the combat abilities on. It seems like a bit of a missed opportunity there. I think I would have much appreciated if they could put me into a bit of a test combat environment or something like that, just to practice a little bit with the new combat abilities and make sure I actually have done it. Even if it's just within the little window portal that comes up within the game that shows you the different abilities that are available. They do show you a video of the guy correctly doing the combat ability, but I think it was Matt Sophos, the writer for this game, that told me about this great book called The Ultimate Guide to Video Game Writing. And in The Ultimate Guide to Video Game Writing, they said, hey, if you can show the player, then that's better than telling them. And in this case, they are showing a video. So yeah, that's better than describing it in text. And I think in this case, they actually do both. But the book also says, if you can allow the player to do something, then that's even better than showing them, because then they're going to remember, because they've starting to build that muscle memory and they've achieved it themselves at least once. So this is an example where they've gotten through the through the tell, they've gotten through the show, but they haven't quite achieved the do. And I think if they could do that, it'd be even better. So that's just one way I think they could improve sort of tutorialization around some of those more complicated combos that you can unlock through the skill progression tree. Okay, so we're talking about controls. Let's talk about the PS5 controller. The PS5 controller is fucking amazing. I think Mark Cerny, though, is probably going to be a little bit disappointed with Sony Santa Monica here, though, because it definitely does not feel like a PS5 game. Okay, maybe that's a maybe that just is a bit of a serious conversation. So maybe we should come over here to talk about that. But here's the reality, folks. I don't think this game was developed on PS4. I don't have any inside knowledge I could provide on that, but it definitely feels like a PS4 game that's available on PS5. Don't get me wrong, you definitely notice a difference. I played it on both, and the PS5 loading times are insane, super duper fast compared to PS4. However, the game really doesn't take advantage of a lot of the adaptive controls, particularly the trigger or some of the other buttons that you can press and sort of inside this game. And it would have been awesome if they did. There is, I believe, some remap capability where I think for some basic thing like sliding your thumb on the... I don't even know what it is, right? It's like sliding your thumb on the gamepad. I do think the team has some support for that kind of thing. But for the most part, whatever this is called, where you do this little stroke of the controller, I don't know what that's called. But they do have some support for that. I think you could rebind controls to do that. But for the most part, it doesn't feel like this game really is using the PS5 to its full capability when it comes to the control set. With that being said, it definitely does when it comes to the adaptive level streaming and stuff like that, because oh my god, there is some amazing vistas in this game. I cannot even begin to explain how freaking beautiful this game is. It is one of the most beautiful games I have ever played, without a doubt. Without a doubt. It's gorgeous. In film, we sometimes talk about this phrase. It's called every frame a painting, where basically with a film, you've got 120 minutes. You've got so much opportunity to, hey, look, not everybody has this opportunity, right? But when you've got the budget that a game like God of War does, or a big major motion picture, you can design each one of the different frames that you're going to experience within the storyboard of whatever movie you're making, and you can design them with enough care and detail that it feels almost as if every frame is a painting. Every frame is a picture, essentially, that you're designing for the sake of your film. And with video games, you've got a lot of constraints there, right? And amazing credit to the cinematographer on this game. His name is Dori Arazi, and he has a good GDC talk on this topic. I've also spoken to him at length about this kind of stuff. It is tough. It's a really tough design problem in order to find how the hell I'm going to position this camera. But the camera work in this game is amazing, and it's certainly motivated to do so because the visuals in this game are just incredible. Some of the best in class, without a doubt. Constantly, when you're fighting enemies, there's sparks flying, there's magic effects. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. When I was fighting with Agrabota, she's throwing these like little smoke bombs or shit like that. I felt like I was in one of those what is that Indian festival where you throw colors at people, or the color run, whatever it's called. So many. It's just gorgeous. It's so cool. And then there's other elements too, where you are just in awe at not only the visuals, but the technical capability that has went into achieving some of the most craziest things I've seen in this game, right? There's this one particular scene where you are climbing up a mountain and you can look back constantly throughout the adventure. Actually, one of the characters, he says, don't look down, because you'll get scared if you're on the cliff. But I was constantly looking down in amazement at how beautiful the vista was and how seamless the adaptive level streaming was in order to get me all the way up the mountain, and I could still look down and see in the little village there was some AI that were doing some basic pathfinding and walking around and pretending that they were real people, and it was immersive as fuck. It was so cool. I loved it. This game it's amazing. It's amazing when it comes to the visuals. It's absolutely incredible. it's beautiful, right? You can literally sit down and just watch this game. It's like a movie, as many people have said, right? And I think it's going to get adapted to the screen at some point. That's a testament to the incredible amount of work, I'm sure, that has gone into the visuals for this game. It's really beautiful. Okay, let's sorry, a little bit more about gameplay. I want to talk a little bit about the bosses. The bosses that sometimes did feel very passive, or at least I felt extremely passive when I was fighting the boss. That's what I meant to say. I often felt like I had to just sort of wait for them to give me an opportunity to do a parry, and I needed to exploit that, and it just didn't feel in line with being the God of War. I felt like I was constantly on the defensive, and then suddenly they'd give me a parry opportunity, and then I'd be able to do the strike and punch the guy and whatever. I think in this game, they do a much better job of highlighting the parries and the shield break opportunities. They do this with these red rings, where one ring is yellow, which means, hey, do a parry. There's another ring, which is 2 concentric rings of blue, which means do a shield break. And that's fantastic. They do a really good job with that. And I actually, after playing this game, I went back to the previous God of War to see in which ways it was better and which ways it was worse. And that was a significant improvement in that they did a really good job of sort of showing those prompts in the middle of combat in a way that wasn't intrusive. It's definitely non-diegetic to have these random circles appearing around the screen, right? But it works really well. So kudos to the team for sort of figuring out what that visual language would be for the design, because it's a great decision, and I think it definitely makes the gameplay feel better. But as I was saying, there's definitely times where you feel like you're being very reactive. Here's this guy who the team creating Doom Eternal got a little bit of a lot of negativity for. But basically, it's very frequently that this particular enemy is called the Marauder. Was frustrating players because you really can't hit this guy unless you wait for his green eye flash, and then you could actually do damage to him. Now, the truth is there are a variety of ways to stagger this enemy. You could use grenades, I believe, and maybe you could shoot his dog. I think that might also have an effect. But for the most part, it's the case that you sort of have to wait for him to do that green eye flash, and then you can interrupt his attack. And I got to tell you, yeah, so he's doing that green eye flash, and hopefully we'll see an example of... Yeah, maybe if we slow it down just a little bit, because this game is so freaking fast. Yeah, so here he's doing the flash. The player successfully interrupts the attack when he's doing the flash, and the result is the enemy is now in a dazed state that he could be damaged and he could be attacked. So you really have to time the attack perfectly to the point where he's got the green eye flash, and that's when you can go in for the shot. Players didn't like this. Putting it mildly, the Marauder was sort of the number one complaint when it came to that game critically. From a gameplay perspective, let's say. Why? Because the character feels passive, right? You're waiting for an attack of opportunity. There's not a lot you can do to precipitate that opportunity. There's a lot of cases like that in God of War where basically you're sort of just waiting for a window to do it, and it doesn't feel good, man. It's not a good time, man. You don't feel like the God of War, right? You feel like a little plebeian in some Dark Souls game where like where you're not the god, right? In Dark Souls it works, because in Dark Souls you're the little engine that could. Right? And you're fighting like this giant god, mammoth beast killer. But in God of War, you're the fucking beast, man. You're the God of War. So you should be the one precipitating those attacks and waiting for these attack of opportunities where, you're just holding your shield up and you're just trying to find the right time to parry. You feel like a little turtle. It doesn't feel good, and it doesn't really match the player story, let's say. It doesn't match the player fantasy. I talked about the camera a bit before, but I just wanted to say the camera work in this game is really exceptional. When I was working on the team, the camera was done, I think, almost completely by one person, this guy named Phil. Holy shit, that's incredible. I think they've further expanded on it, and Denny, had said in the interview that, as the game, this is sort of their second round on this reboot of the game, and so they've been able to design the combat a bit better around that, and I think it shows. I think everything's gelling for this team right now, and this game is just running really incredibly when it comes to the camera and how that is incorporated into different elements of the gameplay. And of course, the glory kills brings us into the animations. So here's the truth, folks. The animations feel excellent. Really, really incredible. Now, there's definitely a lot of recycled content there. So if that frustrates you, then it shouldn't, because the truth is the animations were great from the start. There was really great animations in the original outing from this team, and they're reusing a lot of them because they're really fucking good, man. They feel great, and they're extending it, and they're trying to tune it, and they're trying to improve it. And I love it. I love all the animations. I think they look incredible. Obviously, you could see a lot of money went into the motion capture and the team. I think I think his name's Bruno, who leads that. There's a lot of people I'm sure who are involved in that, and they are just kicking ass, right? The animations are really pretty great. There was an opportunity I saw that I think didn't meet my expectations. I think there was definitely an opportunity for a little bit of improvement, and that is I noticed there was not a lot of flinching. Some enemies certainly didn't flinch at all, but I think it was the case that more often than not, enemies were not flinching. What is a flinch? By flinching, I mean they were not performing what's called an additive animation blend. Let me explain what that means a little bit, because there's some folks who are going to be watching this video who don't know any of those terms. Okay, an additive animation blend. So, there's two different kinds of animations, let's say. The first is a baked animation. So a baked animation might look something like this. I'm in maybe an idle animation, and then I'm going to start playing a jab animation. So I might extend my fist out to do a punch, and then I'll retract it, and that's the end of the jab animation, right? And so this is how you can imagine many games are made, where basically they're in an idle animation, then they punch, they're in a jab, they finish the jab, and now they're back to the idle, right? We've seen this time and time again. Any sort of typical finite state machine animation implementation is going to use something like this, where you're switching between one animation or another, right? Those are baked animations, which is to say, well, what is an animation, basically? It's just a series of joint transformations for a skeleton, right? A rig. So in this case, you can imagine that the animation is just a series of coordinates that are setting where my arm bones are going to be, and then where my arm bones are going to be at the end, right? In the middle, in the end, at the start. That's what a baked animation is. You've sort of set it in stone where these different positions are going to be. That's a baked animation. An additive animation is a little bit different. Instead of saying where these different joints are going to be throughout the course of an animation, you're instead going to say, what is the delta, what is the change in the transformations of each of these different joints? So for example, an additive animation might instead be, well, most commonly a hit reaction. So for example, one additive animation might be if I get punched in the back, let's say, I'm going to throw my arms up like this. And so what's cool about that is if I'm getting punched in an idle, let's say someone comes behind me and they slap me on the head or whatever, then if I'm in the idle, I throw my hands up like this. And then if I'm in the middle of a jab, I might get punched while I'm in the jab, and that might look something like this. I go for the jab, and then my arms go up, and then I come back into my idle state, right? And so that kind of blends really nicely on top of the baked animations. And because all I'm doing there is I'm not saying where the arm needs to be during this hit reaction. I'm just saying I need to increase, let's say, the height position of wherever my arm is located relative to where it normally is in whatever baked animation I'm playing. So it's just bringing my arms up. It doesn't matter where in position the arms are. They could be over here. They could be over there, right? That's sort of the difference between the baked animation. Okay, all of that is to say I didn't see flinching within this game. Some enemies do, and many enemies have it where they're like doing a cooked animation. They're getting ready to throw a fireball or something, and you can hit them, and that'll stop their animation in its tracks. But I didn't see additive blends, and let me show you why that kind of sucks. Because it definitely, you definitely notice it. Here's an example. Let's just go into some examples, because I think it's going to be a bit more illustrative to show this thing, because it's extremely visual to describe. I'm just gonna try to here. You know what? Let's play out this combat. Here, I'm gonna play out this combat sequence. I want you to just watch it, and then we'll go back in slow-mo, and I'll try to explain what's going on. Okay, that is all we needed to see. So let's go back. Okay, now let's go in slow motion and let's talk a little bit about what's going on there and where it could be better. So this guy is clearly in some sort of charge up animation, right? And I don't know if this is interruptible or not. I guess we'll see. But the player has elected to start an attack right now. So he's going to try to interrupt this charge or at least somewhat damage him. And as you saw there, the whip went completely through him and the guy did not react at all. In fact, look at this fucking blood coming out of this guy's head. He just got slashed in the freaking cranium. He didn't lose much damage, but his reaction is nothing at all. He does not even care. And this is literally like one of the guy's main attacks, right, as Kratos. But this is what I'm talking about, where basically he just continues on in the animation as if it doesn't matter. Now, sometimes they play hit reactions. So we're going to see that here, where basically he's been hit while he was going in for an attack, so he's going to play a hit reaction. That is different than an additive animation because he's basically choosing to do a new animation path that is showing his reaction to the hit instead of going forward with whatever the attack was, right? In this case, right, he's doing an attack. You can see he's swinging the thing, but he doesn't change at all how he's swinging the thing, despite taking all this damage from the guy shooting him, right? And this happens again, I think, right here, where basically you could see he's going into this attack animation. He gets his freaking face gets slashed off by these blades, but he doesn't react at all. He just keeps attacking. The blade literally goes through his body in some physics that doesn't make sense, and he's not reacting at all. He's just continuing his attack. He's not reacting at all. And the player's like, oh shit, I better just get out of the way of this guy because he's not responding to my movements at all, and it just feels very unresponsive as a player, right? There are ways to do this better. Obviously, this is something that I think id does very well, but there are other games as well that do this. And I mean, what we're talking about here is basically God of War's got the situation right now where it seems like the enemies are in a binary state. They're either going to punch you or they're going to react to your attack, right? Because you've interrupted them. When in reality, right, that's not how something works, right? If you take damage and you've applied the forward momentum, then you're going to just react to that damage as you apply it, right? And so additive blends are much more realistic, and they sell that momentum and that conservation of momentum much better than the way it's been implemented here, right? It makes a lot more sense if I'm gonna do a punch and somebody punches me in the middle of it, instead of like something like this, right? I might do like, right? Because I've already committed to it and my body's forward, right? So this is a little bit of going into details here. I understand this is maybe a little more technical than everybody's going to appreciate, but I just wanted to explain sort of what an additive animation blend is and how it was definitely noticeable that they weren't in this game. With that being said, the animations are very good. This is just one of those things that's going to take it from middle of the road, right? Where, yeah, you know, this is sort of the average combat animations I'd expect to see in a fighting game, to something that is, hey, this is industry leading. This is, you know, the kind of tech that everybody's going to look at and say, oh shit, like that feels responsive. That feels real in a way that maybe you don't even notice, but you certainly feel, where you're like, oh shit, these guys aren't taking any damage from my attacks. It feels like my attacks aren't doing anything. You might not even know exactly what is causing that feeling until, you know, you dive in there and you can sort of feel the difference of these guys are actually, they're reacting in some way to the chain that I'm literally slicing through their fucking face. Whereas right now they don't even care, right? They're just ignoring it. So I think that sums up everything I had to say about animations. Overall, though, very good quality. We're just talking about what's going to take it from, you know, good to great, right? Because there's a big leap between good and great, right? This game is good. At times, it is very good. But there's only a few ways, I think, in which this game is really greatness, which is why, as we start getting into the overall here, I'm going to say this game is definitely overall, just like its predecessor, somewhere in the 4 out of 5 range. As I alluded to earlier, the Metacritic right now is something like 8 out of 10, where the predecessor was something like 9 out of 10. I feel like both those scores are bang on. I think they're fairly reflective of sort of what we're seeing here. It's a really good game. It's definitely leading the industry, and it deserves all the credit that it's received. So, in summary, let's see what I wrote here. I think the game has a lot of bugs and a lot of boring parts, okay? That much is true. It definitely has some serious problems. And the narrative is larger than the first, but not necessarily better. The plot is often unfocused and feels a little watered down. The combat is solid and the boss battles are memorable and awesome, but most of the game, and I'm referring to maybe fighting the fodder enemies or some of these puzzles that take up a lot of time, most of the game is not boss battles. And fighting those fodder enemies rarely amounts to more than essentially a game of ability cooldown management. In some encounters, the poor enemy variety and bland arena design make the game feel a bit too monotonous, and ultimately, unfortunately, I did become just too bored to finish the game. So, while I can't truly rate this game overall, because I didn't finish it myself, I did finish the game through watching playthroughs and through observing my brother play. I went over, I was at my parents' house, over Christmas, and we played through the rest of the game together because he had caught up to me real quick. He's a pro gamer if there was one. I'd say that, if I was just... I think it's fair to say maybe I shouldn't be able to rate the whole game just because I haven't finished the whole game myself. So I'll say I'm just rating the part that I played, which is the first 70%. And I'd say the first 70% and what I've seen, through the little bits I've played of the later sections, I'd say it's solidly 4 out of 5 stars. A very good game. And at times, fleetingly, a great game, for sure. I think that just about wraps up everything I have in my review here. I'm just going to go on a bit of a tangent here, which is that I do think this game was a little bit too long. There's definitely some monotonous parts, but it makes me think about what we could do as designers in order to explore accessibility in that realm, right? Because the truth is, this game does have different difficulty modes, and it's got a difficulty mode that's supposedly like just for the story, but I don't want a difficulty mode that's just going to make the enemies easier, and that's essentially what the story mode does. I want a difficulty mode that cuts out the bullshit, and there isn't really a difficulty mode that does that. There's so many of these little random fights that you get into that have no influence on the plot, or these little puzzles that you just want to skip through them, right? They're irrelevant for somebody who's actually there for just the story. It would be really nice if there was a difficulty mode that just, let you skip through a lot of the combat encounters in such a way that, you could just sort of zoom past a lot of this stuff. Because even when I was playing on the Give Me Story mode, it didn't save me any time. And for me, the resource really is time, where unfortunately I don't have enough time to review all these games to the extent I'd like to. I don't have the time to play all these games to the extent I'd like to. It's frustrating for sure, but I think that it would be great if there was some sort of difficulty or maybe some other gameplay mechanic where I could sort of skip through sections that I'm not interested in playing. Hey folks, I'm not saying every game needs that. I certainly think if the creative directors, designers, whatever, want you to play through a certain section because they feel, for whatever reason, they want players to experience that, hey, I think that's fine, right? But I think seeing what this team has done, especially on the accessibility front, it does seem like a feature set along these lines would be something in tune with what they're interested in. Another way to think about this might be, social engagement, right? One of the ideas I had, sort of a random idea, but I think it'd be so cool if, like in one of these AAA games, if you could sort of save off your progress in some way that you could share it to another friend, and then he could start where you left off. And maybe there is some way to do this through the PlayStation Network, but I think it could be generalized into something even more accessible. So one idea I had was, what if I'm in the middle of playing the game and I get to a section that I can't beat, or a section that, in this case, bores me, right? And I'm like, I'm not having fun right now, right? I don't want to play it. I'd rather somebody else come in here and play it with me, but maybe I'm a solo gamer, so I don't have anybody who can sort of pick up the reins for me. It would be so nice to know where I am in the story and switch over to a YouTuber's playthrough and then watch them from exactly where I left off sort of progress the story. Because right now I'm just scrubbing through a timeline that's literally 18 hours long trying to figure out, where I was in the game. It'd be nice if there was some way for me to sort of switch over to that. And the opposite, I think, would be even more powerful, where, hey, I'm watching the streamer play the game. He gets to this section that looks really fun. I want to pop back in right now. Is there some way that I could sort of click the video and go to that part of the game on my console and then sort of pick up where he left off? Wouldn't that be awesome? It's just something I've been thinking about recently. I think it'd be a really cool feature. All right. With all that being said, that about wraps up my review for God of War Ragnarok 2022. It's an amazing game. I highly recommend you check it out. If you want to know what it was like to work on the team, I had a very, very small role in this game. I was an intern for 2 months. You will find I think I'm in the credits for this game, but I am like at the absolute bottom, right? I think I apparently my work was not significant enough for me to be put in my own department of gameplay engineering. So I'm in the there's like a section just for interns, and I think I'm like intern number 3 or something like that. So my influence was a little bit on the smaller side, right? So I don't take any credit for all the amazing awards that these guys have won. It was amazing just to be on the same team as these guys. They're really incredible, guys and girls and gender non-binary individuals. But here's the thing. If you want to check out what it was like to be on that team, check out my YouTube video, Intern of War, which I will link up here somewhere in the video. Click that link, and you will be able to see what it was like. And hit the subscribe button if you want to see more videos like this video, if you want more God of War content. And if you have questions on my thoughts on the game or anything along that nature, please just leave them in the comments section below. I'll catch you in the next one. Bye.